Hi, and welcome back to the History Machine podcast. This is episode 17 on late Rome. Now, I know we promised that we are going to come back with Constantine, but after investigating him a little bit more, we had to come to the conclusion that we couldn't talk about Constantine without talking about Diocletian. We couldn't talk about Diocletian without talking about Aurelian, and we couldn't talk about Aurelian without talking about the crisis of the 3rd century. And eventually it just kept going back and back and back. So this is going to be a bit of a cover-all of the late Roman period. So to start, and I'm going to go back quite a bit to explain some of the context and where we're going to end up. If you remember, the House of Caesar ended with Nero dying, and he was the last male heir of the Caesars. So when he died, he created a colossal power vacuum. Now, for about the guts of a century, the Roman Empire had been directly managed and was under complete control of rulers who all came from a single family, and that was the Claudian-Julian dynasty. For succession, there was an unwritten rule of imperial succession in Rome, because up to the moment of Nero's death, the emperor was directly related to Augustus. So no other Roman could suddenly just, put themselves forward as the candidate of the next emperor unless they were part of that Claudian-Julian family. So the death of Nero opened up a few new possibilities. The first option was a return to the Republican Rome. Now this was simply not a viable option. So it's a very interesting hypothetical, but with the Senate cowed for literally decades, it's not realistic to expect that they'd reinstall the old method of government with their elections and their magistrates and, the quarrelling and the king of the hill race. It wasn't going to happen. With that option out the window, they were going to go with the introduction of a new emperor. So with no Caesarian succession possible, you're going to have a floodgate of brand new candidates for the role of emperor. So effectively, any ambitious commander from some powerful family could suddenly potentially take command of the empire. And this was a very, very tempting offer and resulted in the year of the 4 emperors. And as the name would suggest, the 4 emperors were declared in the space of about a year, and they were Galba, Otho, Vitellius, and Vespasian. To start, Galba was the older candidate. He was the first one to step forward to become the new emperor. Everyone thought Galba would make a good emperor until he didn't. And he was very quickly usurped by Otho, who then was quickly killed by Vitellius, who's kind of remembered as being this really, really fat aristocrat from a ruling Roman family. And eventually, Vespasian took over. The chief significance of this first civil war, and we are blowing past it just to explain some of the context, is that there was now a new precedent set for future civil wars. There existed new roads to power that did not exist during the rule of the Claudian Julians, and the new requirements to rule were as follows. Probably the most important thing you would need is support from the legions. So any ambitious or opportunistic commander with the loyalty and respect to the troops under their command could suddenly be declared, and funnily enough, sometimes this was done without the commander's consent, an imperator. Having thousands of capable legionnaires and auxiliaries backing you gave you a very, very good chance of ruling all of the empire. And that was once, this bloody civil war.
Yeah, I mean, this
finished.
technically works under any regime because you're just cooing the previous emperor. But of the 4 emperors mentioned, Vespasian does have the best rating according to the History Machine. So that's why they finished the year with him.
Yeah, pretty much might makes right in this situation. So your next route for power is to get support from the good old friends, the Praetorian Guard. Now, if you can remember from the previous episodes, the Praetorian Guard pretty much function as the bodyguards of the imperial family. And more often than not, they end up killing more emperors than they end up protecting. It's just their method. They're like a secret service that, specializes in assassinating presidents. They're highly unreliable, but unfortunately they're this requirement if you want to maintain power. And that's particularly because they are positioned in Rome and they're the main military force, we'll say, cowing the Senate and keeping the area of Rome under control. So if you want to be in charge, you better be pretty sure you either have a lot of legions so you can take care of the Praetorian Guard, and or you have the Praetorian Guard under your thumb and ready to go. To be supported by the Praetorian Guard as the new emperor, because they're located in the city of Rome and the proximity of them to power lets them very quickly take advantage of any kind of power gap. And then if you're declared as the new emperor, they can pretty much inform the legions in other provinces that, there's been a new succession and this person has taken over, and you're all probably going to get a pay raise, but this person is the new emperor. When the emperor takes over, they almost always give a pay rise to the legions and the Praetorian Guard, and that was pretty much practically mandatory, and is the surest way to cement a new ruler into power. The last method, which is by far the least powerful and least influential of the three kingmakers, is what's left of the Senate. Because the Senate still kind of formally approved a new emperor. Now, every now and then, and didn't go well, they would often go, we've approved this candidate, while some legions would go, we've approved this one, and the Praetorian Guard might say, we've approved this person. And usually leads straight into conflict. But generally, you could technically become emperor if the Senate supported you, and of course you immediately try and scram and get some support from a military branch. But it's just, I think they're important to mention that they are there. And generally, the Senate would retroactively approve any kind of candidate once the legions and the Praetorian Guard had selected them. And it's kind of to make the Senate feel like they still have some kind of semblance of influence, that they still have a little bit of approval, and, you know, that they are more important than they think they are. Anyway, so in order to be an emperor, you would have to have support of at least one of those three groups. But of course, usually you'd like to try and get support of all three. And often candidates will be put forward in a rapid succession over a short period of time, and either there'd be a new civil war or there'd be some timely murders, and that would stabilize the situation.
I think really, again, all of those three things are things that are valid any point in history, anywhere, but it's just, you're now accepting that your regular system isn't a republic, isn't a monarchy, it's just your endless coups and civil wars.
It always reminds me of that Futurama joke of like, do you know how long the average emperor reigned for? And it's like, 100 years? And it's like, no, 2 weeks. And it's like, oh, I thought you were only going to ask that question if the number was really high or really small, so I went for really high.
And that's why you need the Praetorian Guard, because they will be the reason you only last 2 weeks.
It's very much what they do. So now, I'm making it sound like it's a crazy rat race all the time. There were very peaceful transitions of power. And for example, I'm going to look at the 5 good emperors, and where that happened was the senior Augustus, the emperor here, he would adopt the son of like the best man of the next generation for a smooth passover of power across generations. Now the ruling emperor would take the title of Augustus, and the successors would take the lesser title of Caesar. So even though, you know, the Caesarian family is gone, they're still borrowing the titles. They're still using them to kind of to have that sense of legitimacy, where it's like, well, I'm Augustus and I'm declaring you a Caesar, and we're going to continue that relationship. And Augustus is always acknowledged as effectively the emperor, and the Caesar is the next in line. And sometimes you can have 2 Augustuses, or you can have multiple Caesars, but it's the kind of idea that it's, you know, you have the high-ranking title and the slightly lesser title, but we all know what's effectively going on here. If somebody's being declared Caesar, it means they're next in line. Big question of how we're going to go straight into this episode, how we're going to develop into this episode, is what is happening with the Roman Empire. So the Roman Empire steadily declines over centuries, and I will make a case that it's the very process that enabled such a large and dominating empire to occur had planted the seeds of its own destruction and eventually led to its own inevitable decline and collapse. Now, you will hear people argue sometimes that the Roman Empire could have lasted indefinitely, but I'd like to say, can you point to any empire in history that does do that? Because eventually you're going to have a decline and fall. It just happens. Think of the Persians, the Athenians, the Qin, the Mongols, and even today you can see the 19th century European powers that once dominated the majority of the world's landmass just kind of shrink back towards Europe. And with all of that said, okay, it's not like the people living in these areas that, you know, have been conquered just disappear when the empire falls. People live on, and there's usually just a new, different ruler, or different unions, or different governments, or different confederacies, or whatever it might be. It just happens over time. It's the very, very nature of empire and rule. But anyway, to go back to Rome, what built the empire was the legions, and you can make a strong case that that is exactly what killed the empire as well. So the legions, to explain the history and development, you have to go all the way back to Marius and Sulla. Now, we covered them in earlier episodes, but with the establishment of professional soldiers that were equipped by the state and fanatically loyal to their commanders, that allowed for excellent, logistically sound, well-armed, heavily armoured, heavy infantry. This in turn allows for men like Julius Caesar and Pompey Magnus to conquer large sections of the Mediterranean in a relatively short amount of time. So, they're given or inherit this really sophisticated war machine that is logistically sound and well equipped and standardized, and they just can go, I'm pointing mine at Spain, I'm pointing mine at France. So it allows them to conquer like very large areas in a very short amount of time, and that's simply because of the professional army that you have. These troops are loyal for one very simple reason, and that reason is pay, and the promise of potentially more pay. Now that could be gold, it could be land, it could be slaves, it could be anything that is deemed valuable in the ancient world, but money and the promise of money is what fuels these legions. Sulla kept his troops, for example, paid by killing off wealthy enemies and confiscating their property. And had he not done that, the legions probably would have turned on him and just strung him from a post. He had to consistently find ways to pay them, and he had to consistently find ways to keep them loyal just by making sure that, the coffers were full. So he'd be a good example for that. Now, when talking about a Roman legionnaire, you have to kind of understand, like, how financially sound was it? It's really hard to make direct comparisons because we're talking about more than 2,000 years ago, but from their establishment at the time of Marius, a legionnaire was paid 125 denarii per year. Now, it's hard to make a very decent conversion to like today's wages, but it's safe to say that that was somewhat livable. Now, there's always that potential promise from your commander or some big bonus in the future that's going to be your payout, or, that's going to make it all worthwhile. But you're kind of on a somewhat livable wage.
And I suppose that is significant as well, just because, as we're saying, what makes it so easy for Rome to conquer throughout that period is the rest of Europe mostly is extremely unorganized. Their entire payday, for other parts of Europe, for raiding parties, say, is that big payday at the end after you've raided, whereas Rome still have like the fallback of you get a salary even if that doesn't come through.
That's very true. That is very, very true. Now, you make more when you win more, and of course that's better. That's a good little incentive to do it. You hit your. That sounds terrible. You hit your targets.
You get your base pay and you get your commission.
Yeah, God, that's awful. But yeah, other countries are effectively militias, and like they would lose money. It's like, well, I have a farm to take care of. I can't go soldiering for the next 10 years. I have a family. I have bits and pieces.
Yeah.
This is only
if you're not done by the summer, people are just going to mutiny because they need to go back and harvest.
Pretty much. So Julius Caesar introduces the first significant pay rise for legionnaires. Now, Carl, get this: Caesar doubles the legionnaires' wages. It's no surprise to say that any boss who doubles your pay overnight is just going to be popular, and this shows because Caesar's troops, even compared to other commanders, they are fanatically loyal to Caesar. The wage doubles from 125 to 250 denarii a year. Once the empire and the ruling dynasty are established, each new succession brings along with it a nice little bonus and a nice pay bump to the legions. And the city guards and the Praetorian Guard, they all get a nice little pay bump. Any emperor not willing to do that usually is not emperor for very long. And also, this is a fun one, but, if you're sitting back going, my wages haven't increased in a while, very often emperors, if they ruled for 5, 10, 15, 20 years, on a particular anniversary, they just go, time to give a pay bonus to the legions, or give them like, a little bump in pay. Because just to remind you who's in charge in case you
start job hunting for a different empire.
Yeah. Yeah. In case you do get that idea into your head. So to understand why the legionnaires work so well, the root cause they always go back to is what made the legionnaires great? And one word shows up, and it's centurion. Now, the centurions are effectively the officers of the army. They're a slightly different breed to the bog standard legionnaire. Each centurion leads about 80 or so men into battle. It's never an exact number. Some people die, there's new recruits, they also have people under their command. But they lead about 80 people into battle, and the centurion's wages reflect this. Now, a centurion will make at least 10 times the standard legionnaire's pay. That said, the median or the typical wage is 17 times the wage of a legionnaire, and some centurions have been reported to earn as much as 40 times the median wage. So these pay, gaps are based entirely on a number of factors, and that's like time in the army, rank, political connections, Your family status, what cohort you're leading into battle. Is it the first cohort? That'd be the most important centurion. Not to say too much, but like their wages are way higher than the regular troop. And I kind of find it funny, and you might have come across this too, Cathal, because usually it happens in tech companies and startup companies. They often kind of go, we want to romantically introduce a management system based on the centurions of Rome, and we're going to incorporate it into our workforce. And they often cite centurions as the reason for the legionnaires' success. And if they read even a little bit about Roman history, or did a little bit of an investigation into it, they'd understand why they should never be doing this. Because a centurion makes the wage they do because they're a very talented and capable person, and they're required to make difficult decisions in real time on the battlefield. But off the battlefield, they're often required to train and drill the troops, assign labour to whatever men are under their command. And you think that making 17 times their wages would discourage anyone from any kind of greedy behaviour. But amazingly, that's not what actually happens. Depending on the specific time in the Roman Empire, a legionnaire would serve about 16 to 20 plus years. Now, some would return as what they call evocati troops, and that's after dismissal. You kind of go, well, I finished up my career, I have no other marketable skills, so I'm going to go back and, be a legionnaire again. In this time, anyway, a legionnaire would serve from 16 to 20 years. They'd make the typical wage, plus maybe a pay bump when the emperor takes over, or after an anniversary, that kind of a thing. And the person who decides the day's schedule of labour and tasks and odd jobs and whoever needs to dig a ditch or fetch water, that was organised by the centurion. So one sure way to get the centurion off your back is to bribe him. Now, centurions, especially in times of peace, became really accustomed to these bribes. So imagine, Cathal, if you will, you're a new recruit, and I'm your centurion, and I'm going to assign you some back-breaking labour day in, day out until you get the hint of what I want you to do to get this to stop. How long is it going to take you? So similarly, any veterans who are looking to save wages, so you're saving away, you've got your bonus, you've got your bits and pieces, and you're like, oh great, I've got a nice little nest egg to sit on. They'll find themselves caught in a vicious cycle of saving up money and then working to a breaking point, cracking under that pressure and be absolutely exhausted. And you'll end up gradually paying up all of your savings to the centurion. Now, not every centurion did this kind of horrible bribing situation, but this kind of corruption existed all the same.
The backbreaking labour cycle for people who are just getting too much money, again, fits with the tech bro.
I think it does, yeah.
Also, I don't have a good segue to this, but Mark Zuckerberg's hair is the way that it is because he is obsessed with Augustus and wants to look like him.
I have heard that too, and it sounds pretty silly. And also, his big jiu-jitsu thing feels really commodious in the arena.
Yes, yes, it does.
It does. It really does. I'm sure he's got excellent ground game, but but it does feel really commodious in the arena fighting rhinos and other gladiators. But anyway, we go off track.
Speaking as a bald man, his hair looks terrible. I would not take my hair back if it looked like that.
Yeah. So why might you say is any of this important to know? So to go back to the legionnaires and to see what's going on, I want you to imagine you're 40 years of age, you're a legionnaire, you've been in the army for 20 years, you've got no savings, you have no skills outside of the military, and you've no obvious bonus coming your way. You maybe you've got 2 to 3 years left because you're after, you're killed your body for 20 years of hard, constant physical drilling. So you're at that point where, like, you can imagine if you were a fighter, your career is over. So you've got very little time left and you've got nothing to show for it. Now, there is one very obvious solution to your problem and one sure way to make quick money, and that is to go to war. And there's one very sure way to start a war, and that is to proclaim your commander an imperator. So, plus also the new recruits will see a little pay bump, so they'll definitely be on board as well. There's always this big temptation from legions stationed out near the edges of the empire to go, I'm running low on money, I'm not doing well, I've got nothing to show for myself, I might as well go to war. All of this information, though, that I know with a bit of an exposition dump of just what the Roman world looks like right now and what it looks like, after the Caesars. But all of this is to help explain where we're going with this episode and how the rise of the Roman Empire is eventually followed by its decline. Now, the empire is established by the strength of its legions. The legions need to be paid to function as professional soldiers. Now, in order to pay the legions, the empire has to be taxed. That can happen in many kind of different forms. Tax can be coins, it can be food, it can be other goods and services, but that needs to happen. Tax and resources need to happen to keep the army going. Now, in order to allow the agricultural and commerce machine to function, civilians have to be protected from external threats, like an invasion. So therefore, you have a high number of legionnaires are needed in the empire. And this is a vicious feedback.
It's almost like a Ponzi scheme. It's just you're borrowing off A to pay B, and then you need C so you can pay off A, and it just keeps going and going and going.
Yeah. So kind of in summary, it's the legions protect the empire, so the empire can pay the legions, so the legions can protect the empire. And it's just that. It's just a circle of just the feedback. That's it. Where can things go wrong with this? And that would be any kind of internal or external factors. So one way to throw a complete spanner into the works is a successful invasion. So they'd be that Goths or Huns or Alemanni. If somebody successfully punches through the legions or wins a few battles and threatens the empire, that is a big no-no. It's like that will collapse the empire. Another one that could threaten the stability of the empire, which is all too common, is a civil war. Because once you've got that internal threat, it's legions are killing legions and you're reducing your own manpower. And generally when legions are trampling around the empire, you can't really be collecting too much taxes. Another strain is if there's a rapid succession of new emperors, because that'll have a number of factors, including the civil wars, but there's usually a rapid increase of wages of the troops. There's kind of a larger strain on the economy with virtually no change to the empire. It's like, well, the army cost this much yesterday, this much. Today it's costing, 5% more. There's no actual change to the empire. There's just more of a demand of money. So as pay goes up, coins are gradually becoming debased to allow for wages to increase. Now, they contain less and less silver over time. At a point, it was at like 80%. Kind of drops to 50%. And eventually it drops to less than 2%. The drops are vicious. Now, a few things. The emperors who are minting these coins know that they're debasing them. They know the value of silver is going down. What they don't know is people are usually skimming even more off the top. And you eventually hit this point where the coins they're making are less physically valuable. To the point where merchants are weighing coins and going, your coin is worth more than his coin because this one is physically heavier. And I know that there's more silver in this coin, even though they should all be taken at face value. They simply aren't. The next big one is inflation. Now, inflation is a problem that's barely understood today, but it definitely wasn't understood in the time of the Roman Empire. And to simply put, if there is a number of coins in circulation that's greater than the number of goods and services being provided, you get less value for money. So, big pile of gold, not many things to buy. You have to spend a lot of gold to buy very small things. That is inflation in a nutshell. And that was a big problem that they barely understood, but it was occurring. Now, an important note, just because there's always a risk of some commander would be declared imperator, to minimize this risk, the ruling emperor would always have to have the majority of legions under their control at all times. Now, the current emperor could often be off in campaign because of this, because they need to move with the legions to deal with whatever crisis is at hand, and they can't move quickly if needed. So the emperor is almost always bogged down with the legions in some area trying to manage it there while the whole empire is
also probably helps you not get murdered by the Praetorian Guard back at home.
Yeah. They might be the least effective group of the professionals ever. Like their job is just to protect the emperor, and it's the last thing they do. It's madness. So in the 2nd century in Rome, we're going to be thoroughly into the age of the Roman Empire, and you're going to have the 5 good emperors. You're going to be at this time period where they're trying to deal with external threats, and those external threats are Germanic tribes and steppe tribes. So up along the Danube, the legions are stationed. They're trying to mine that area. They're getting incursions from Germany. They're fighting the back. It's a very, very defensive war. So this kind of campaign is known as the Marcomannic Wars. So Cathal, what does the history machine think about the Marcomannic Wars?
So the main emperor for this was Marcus Aurelius, and he is lumped under, the 5 good emperors, the ones that were there before you went into full decline. However, he was at the tail end of that, and
yes,
I think you can see the cracks seeping in. The history machine regards him and his performance in this as almost perfectly average. Like, it's amazing how close to average he is. He had 3 battles. He had a win, a loss, and a draw. His wins over expectation is 0. The battle he drew, he was expected to draw. Battle he lost, he was expected to lose. Battle he won, he was expected to win. His casualties suffered over expectation is only 6% above, which isn't great. His casualties dealt is 2% fewer than expected, which is almost nothing. It's just like,
oh my God.
I'd say across like all the parameters that the History Machine judges on, I don't know if there's anyone who's as close to zero, like above or below average as him.
God.
And talking about decline, we had to kind of skim over it because we're covering several centuries in kind of one episode here. But at the start of the Good Emperor's period, you had Trajan. He was mostly involved with the Dacian Wars, that's modern day Romania. An interesting thing actually is you go through centuries from kind of where we finished with Augustus going towards Constantine. On average, Rome's battles get more and more difficult as you go through time. They become less and less dominant and starts being expressed in the History Machine. The Dacian Wars are actually still ones that are kind of earlier on that it's still regarded as hard. It's, Romania, it's very mountainous, it's very tough landscape.
Yes.
And Trajan he had 4 battles, 4 wins. His wins over expectation was 0.54, so like he was in 50-50 battles and he won every time. His casualties dealt over expectation, if regular listeners remember, we made a big deal about Bai Qi in the China episodes, how he had massive casualties dealt. Trajan ranks above him. Bai Qi had 60% more casualties dealt than expected. Trajan was 68%. So he was kind of a monster. He's one of the highest ranking generals in all of the History Machine's database. And then you reach, the tail end of this period, and Marcus Aurelius is just purely average.
Good. Purely average.
Not bad,
That's
but just
insane.
totally average.
Yeah, but just right down the middle. So I'll focus on Trajan for a second. You might find this interesting, Cathal, but effectively, when they were fighting in Dacia, they came across Thracian troops that used a very unusual kind of long curved sword. I think it's like a FALX, like a flax sword. I always mispronounce it. But they were meant to be incredibly skilled troops in the sense that they could just swing their hands very quickly and cut off a head. So serious decapitation troops. And their weapons were so useful that they were able to cut through the segmented Roman armor. So they weren't heavily armored themselves, their enemies, but they were really good at dishing out heavy casualties. And Trajan and the legions adopted different styles of armor and different modifications to their helmets and their armor to try and counter against those weapons over time with the campaigns. So it's those little kind of innovations of, this is a big problem, we need to deal with it, and we did. And they switched to like a fish scale type of armor. Now, you still have the regular segmented stuff as well, but it's just the idea that this legion modifies itself to deal with the threat. And you would kind of think that maybe, throw enough men at the problem and they would have taken it anyway. But for you to say that he did so well and scored so well, it reminds me of that little fact that he made those modifications that you go, that's something that someone really good would do. They'd have a look and see what's the advantage, what kind of change
they're
they
not
could
just
do.
throwing, even though they had all the men in or all the resources, he wasn't purely just throwing men and resource at it.
Exactly.
He was, they were actual addressing the problem.
It wasn't the Zap Brannigan school of wave after wave of men until they got tired from murdering. And likewise, and we move all the way back to Marcus Aurelius. Now, this is a fantastic thing that you can do, but Marcus Aurelius kept like a diary, and that diary is published as meditations. So you can read his works, and it was never intended to be read. That just exists. And the man, as kind of like a very stoic philosopher, has those writings available to read. It's in the public domain, so go ahead, Google it, you'll find it. But the idea that he's remembered really well as this kind of philosopher king, as this really enlightened individual, as like a great mind of history. And I find it fascinating that, he's a great mind of history, but we've shown that like he's a reasonable commander. But he feels like a real Renaissance man in the sense of he's good at a little bit of everything, kind of polymath, but obviously probably better in the whole philosophical side. But I just find it kind of interesting that, the History Machine goes, yeah, he's a pretty functional Roman commander, right down the middle, does what he's meant to do. So in the 2nd century, we also have the Parthian Wars. Now, Rome is having, wars with Parthia. And what does the History Machine think of this era?
So I think this is another sign that like Rome is still doing okay, but the wobbles are showing because, we have two kind of main sections, I guess, in the history machine for this war, and the first one, the Parthians win, and then Rome wins the counterattack. But in both cases, these are battles that the history machine thinks Rome should have won fairly easily.
Really?
The first half that they lost, they had about a 73% chance to win it, and so it sees it as a bungle, really. And then the next section, they do win that fine, but again, history machine thought, 87% chance they should be winning it. So again, it's Rome is still kind of pushing out its borders. They're still doing fine, but it's starting to slow down. They're not just rapidly expanding outwards like they had been. They're maybe having a few mistakes starting to creep in.
Yes. God, I find that fascinating. No, it's very interesting because often, the Romans did not have a good record against the Parthians, but usually it's kind of like the same way when they're dealing with Hannibal. There's often, we can soak the losses, but give it time and we'll win. And I think the history machine itself has also gone, it's about time you've probably dealt with the Parthians. The fact that you're not doing it is probably a bad sign. No, it's just fun because usually people go, the Romans don't do well against the Parthians, and they sometimes don't. But I just find that that's a fun one where, as I said, the history machine thinks, this is what should happen. So anyway, we'll move on, and we're going to move on to the era of the decline. And this era of decline starts with the crisis of the 3rd century. For the Romans, they have a big upset to the Parthians. Now, I'll go in a little bit into the Parthians and who they are and their armies and bits and pieces to help explain a little bit of, we're going to have the Romans against the Parthians. So the Parthians, most of their army is militia. They are descended from kind of steppe nomad horse archers, so the majority of their troops are actually cavalry. It's a very, very cavalry-heavy army, and only the poorest of the poor can't really afford or keep a horse. You're going to find that the Parthians have a lot of light cavalry with good composite bows that are adept and skilled at fighting on horseback and are coordinated. They can work as, good units. They're very good at their mobility and their maneuverability. Now, similarly, like every society, you're going to have people who are fairly affluent. They're going to be able to afford better and better gear. And that's going to lean into this military development. You'll see it in the Parthians, and you'll see it in other eastern tribes and steppe nomads and other areas even along the borders of Rome. And Rome will eventually adopt it themselves. But we're going to look at cataphracts. So cataphracts are pretty much like the precursor of, think, a medieval knight. They're heavily armoured. They're armoured themselves. The horse is armoured. They carried a very long lance, maybe some javelins. Sometimes they're armed with a bow as well. There's different kinds of cataphracts. But the main idea is that they're this very heavily armoured horse. And their job is to just smash into the enemy and cut through them to pieces. Now, sometimes, a cataphract force will have a very well armoured outer layer. The front line will have the best armour, the best equipment, the most coverage, and the guys behind them will have less and less armour. If you want to make a nice little charge of heavy horses. So, they can work in different ways. You'll find different types, but effectively they're really, really heavy horse. And the kind that can just cut through infantry and can cut through other cavalry. Now, this is what the Parthians bring to the table. They bring excellent light cavalry, and they bring a contingent of excellent heavy cavalry. The Romans at this time are still very, very heavily infantry based. The legionnaires are infantry. That is what they are. That is their job. That is what they do. If they are fighting on foot against someone else fighting on foot, they will have the advantage. It is just what they are good at. Now, they can still deal with cavalry, but the Romans themselves pretty much outsource all of their cavalry. They will get them from auxiliaries, be it Celtic or Germanic troops. They'll get Numidian troops. They will hire other cataphracts. They will hire other, they might even get Persian mercenaries. But the Romans do not have particularly good cavalry. What will happen over the period of the crisis of the 3rd century is the Romans will focus on getting better and better cavalry, and their infantry will gradually decline in quality. Now, it's kind of a combination of the armour will change, the bits and pieces will change, the troops will get less disciplined, their equipment won't be quite as up to scratch, and you'll see a small decline in the quantity and quality of the infantry, and you'll see a rapid improvement of the cavalry, particularly the heavy cavalry arm of the Roman troops. Now, this is almost, when you picture the legionnaires in your head, you picture that's the very, very old world. And when you picture the medieval knights, you go, that's the old world, but only like the difference of about 1,000 years. But what we're going to see is the transition between the excellent infantry and the not great cavalry to the excellent cavalry and the not great infantry, and that trend will just continue. So in this battle, the Battle of Nisibis in 1217, the Roman Emperor Macrinus is going to go to battle against the Parthian leader Artabanus IV. So Cathal, what does the History Machine think of this cavalry-heavy army against the Roman infantry-heavy army?
So this is quite an interesting one for the History Machine, because it actually rates it kind of similarly to the last battle against the Parthians that Rome lost. Now, I think, as you mentioned there, like, cataphracts are something new at this point, and our database only goes a couple of centuries beyond this, so I think it hasn't fully figured out that, like, heavy cavalry takes a big leap forward in this period. I don't think the History Machine has enough examples of it yet to fully understand how much better it gets, because it still gave Rome a 70% chance to win this.
Wow, okay.
Did predict big casualties on the Parthian side, and that did happen. However, they themselves dealt out huge casualties to Rome as well, 40% more than expected, and went on to win the battle. And then they would go on the year after to win a follow-up battle to kind of cement that now they were out from under the Roman thumb.
When you say that, like, the Parthians suffered a heavy, they suffered a lot of casualties, keep in mind the Parthians are actually a militia army. Now, the Romans are the professionals. This is what they do day to day. This is the job. But the Parthians are meant to be like, when they're finished this, they're going to go back to their civilian lives. So they might suffer a lot of casualties because of that. But it's surprising that they can dish out so much as well. So I'm not too surprised that the Parthians took a big shock there. But I suppose the History Machine probably thinks they shouldn't have.
Yeah, the History Machine, it's maybe not its most reliable prediction, but it does think Parthians managed to deal out a lot more casualties than expected. Still suffered a lot, but it was kind of what was expected, and then just a big victory against expectation. Now, luckily for the Romans, Artabanus IV, who led this kind of uprising, he would then be deposed by a Sassanid uprising by Ardashir I. Unfortunately for Rome, that leads us to our next battle in the 3rd century crisis, because he targeted Rome next.
Yeah. So I'll do a small explanation of who the Sassanids are. So the Persians, the Achaemenid Persians, obviously went into decline around the time of Alexander. But, as I said, empires rise and fall, and the people kind of, stay in the areas they are in. And the Persians have a big revival as the Sassanid Persians. Now, you might find this kind of cool, Cathal. We're going to see a reintroduction of war elephants. So they're back. They're back again. And they're a very important a very important arm of the Sassanid army. Now, they're used in the sense of like a surprise troop. They're also used as beasts of burden. They can be used as battering rams. They're a multifunctional thing, war elephants. You put a tower on it, you put a couple of archers on it, you can put somebody...
I know that by surprise troop you mean like, as in shock troop, but I just like the idea of stealth elephants. Despite their massive size, somehow they'll surprise you.
No one expected that. But at the time, the ruler now of the Sassanids is known as the Shah, or the King of Kings, the Shah of Shahs. We're seeing where it all kind of links together, that the Sassanids now have heavy cavalry. They still have the cataphracts. They'll have light cavalry. They'll have their regular light cavalry and their lancers and their bowmen. They'll have infantry and they'll have elephants. And I'm not sure if we covered this, effectively you're going to see the 4 branches there of chess, in the sense of the pawns and the king and queen are the infantry. The knight is the light cavalry. The rook on the chessboard is the heavy cavalry, and the bishop is meant to be the elephant. And effectively we can see the connections between the 4 branches of the military, or the 4 different arms of the military, and the chessboard.
And checkmate, the check comes it's the same root word as Shah as well, isn't it? It's like,
yeah, it is. Yeah, and it's meant to be kind of, the checkmate is I think it's like Shamat, or like it's like the king is dead, and you go, oh okay, and then that obviously spun over time just to become checkmate. So you go, oh okay. So you can really see this is where you're going to have It's small little connections like that too. Now, chess goes back even further than that, but I think it's just funny to go, the four arms of the Sassanid military are on the chessboard. That's where we get them, So the Sassanids as a whole, as I said, they've got great heavy cavalry. They've got excellent light cavalry as well. They have a lot more infantry. So, that's where they're differing from the Parthians. They have their war elephants that are usually provided by royalty or high nobility. So they have a very sophisticated, well put together army. And the advantage they have over the Parthians that they will effectively, sweep away and take control of that area is they're more organized. They're very, very similar to Rome in the sense of, they have that kind of hierarchy, they have the structure, they have the logistics, they have the bits, and they are going to be one of Rome's biggest enemies for centuries. So the Sassanids are on the rise and the Romans are just about to go over the hill and onto the decline. So, Cathal, what does the history machine think about the Sassanids taking on the Romans at this time?
So this is another one where I think, there's been centuries of Rome at this point. The history machine has seen evidence that the Roman army works well, and so gives it a very high rating against almost anything else. It had this as a near certainty that Rome would win, and then Ardashir just hammered them. He dealt out 15-16% more casualties than expected, took 15% fewer himself. It was just this is one of the biggest upsets, I think, in the history machine, because it's just Rome that's just been plugging away for ages and might have the occasional slip up, but can always push back. This is usually the point where it would start pushing back again, and it's just not happening. They're just getting hammered. And it's worth saying as well that the war against the Parathians, that was also a big upset. Ardashir is definitely, he's only included in 2 battles in the database, so it's not a great sample size, but yes. If he had more and if he kept as he was going, he would be one of the highest rated generals in the whole database.
Oh, wow. Okay, so definitely got, on the rise. So we're going to add more insult to injury here, where 20 years later, there's a Gothic invasion and a Roman defeat. This is the Battle of Abritius. What's important about this is it's the first battle where a Roman emperor is killed in battle. And this is a pretty big upset. So I will not be too surprised if you're about to tell me something big about this battle. So, Cathal, what does the history machine think about this Gothic invasion and Roman defeat?
Actually, first, I will just say as well, Severus Alexander, the emperor who was defeated by Ardashir, he wasn't killed in battle, but he didn't last that much longer. He lasted about 4 years and then was assassinated in a mutiny. So you can see that Rome are not happy with these performances. But yeah, the Battle of Abritius, it's definitely an upset. It's not as dramatic as the
sources make it out to be.
But it did think that this battle was about 50-50, and Rome not only lost but took about 44% more casualties than expected. They didn't really deal out any big casualties of their own in the process, so it was just kind of a flop. It looks like the stats look kind of like what you'd expect from some of the early Rome battles in the other direction. It just doesn't look like Rome. It doesn't look like the Rome that you're used to.
Yeah. Now maybe I'm gonna put this out in a little way. I think what makes this battle very famous is that the emperor is killed in the battle. Now, a couple of things. If the king dies on the battlefield, or the emperor, or the ruler, or the general, that's usually a bad sign, that you didn't perform well.
For reference as well, the history machine, because I do have a stat on, expectation for, commander death or capture, or things like that. But it happens so rarely that it kind of expects it to not happen as the baseline. If you lose... If you have a commander and he is killed or captured, that's 100% above expectation. That's one more guy you've lost than you expected to. It happening to anyone, any commander at any level, is very rare, and it happening to the actual emperor is totally crazy.
Yeah, so I think maybe even to digest this battle a little bit, I think it's the shock and the upset is the whole idea that the emperor is captured. As much as it kind of looks at the stats, as you were saying, it's not as much of an upset as it's probably portrayed as, but the fact that the most important person on one side of the battlefield was killed, and they're like, that was not expected to happen ever. So that's probably where the big upset comes from, more so than they outperformed us so ridiculously. But if the emperor dies, it's actually
in the database the most standout thing about Alexander, because he's high-ranking in other ways, but nothing too crazy because he usually had the better army. But his biggest kind of outlier stat is the fact that he tends to kill or capture the enemy commanders a lot, and very few other generals pull that off.
Yeah, it's a good plan. So we've had quite a few upsets, but we've got another big one coming in. Now, back to the Sassanids. The Romans are once again soundly defeated at the Battle of Odessa. So let's go a little bit into this battle and what exactly it is about. So at the time, the Roman Empire is under the command of the Emperor Valerian. Valerian is a competent emperor to an extent. You know, this is at a point now where we're going to have like coin flips in terms of ability. It's like, is he competent? I don't know. He got the top job. He might have a little bit in him. What makes this battle very important, and as much as we've had a lot of upsets, is the King of Kings is Shapur I. Now, Shapur I is probably only eclipsed by Shapur II. So that's coming down the line. He is quite a capable and excellent Shah. And where he really, kind of cuts his teeth and makes his record and shows his ability is this battle, the Battle of Odessa. Because in this battle, a Roman army is defeated and captured in its entirety. And for the first time, a Roman emperor is taken prisoner. As such, like, this battle is generally viewed as like one of the worst military disasters of Roman history. It's just like they captured him alive, and this is not to be expected. Now, I'll let you go into the stats first, Cathal, and I'll tell you some of the aftermath about it, because it kind of goes a little bit wild and very funny, and I'd like to go into some of the stories of what possibly happens once you capture an emperor, because you've got a couple of options. But so what does the history machine think about this battle?
So this is where it gets interesting, because I've mentioned in previous episodes the history machine should adjust over time. So like the same army composition won't always be favored in different time periods, as evidence shows that things are starting to shift a bit.
Yes.
By this point, Rome was no longer the favorite in the battle. It actually thought the Sassanids had a huge advantage here. Rome shouldn't have taken the battle is basically how bad it is. It's like a 90% chance to win.
Sorry, did you say 90%?
Yeah. I'm not certain exactly what it based on. You can speculate, but yeah, it just, at this point, it thinks, the Sassanids were going to win this. This is not a good one for Rome to take. Sassanids' losses were very small in this. They were, different estimates, but like they were pretty minimal, small enough fraction of the army. And History Machine thinks they shouldn't have even lost that many.
Oh, wow.
Like as many as they did. The one thing that I guess that stands out where the History Machine didn't expect it was that the loss of basically a whole army, and obviously the loss of the generals. Like it did definitely expect the Sassanids to win this, but it expected them to maybe cause about half the casualties that they did, and obviously didn't expect them to capture any emperors or generals.
But it did. So I'll go a little bit into the aftermath of this battle, because it's quite fun. Obviously, even we don't know exactly what happened, because this is one of those things. If they've captured the emperor, we don't know. We're listening from rumor. What could possibly have happened? I don't know. What do they do with them? There's a couple of ways that I'm going to say the most likely thing that happened is the emperor is just captured and he's brought back as a POW, because you'll hear some Roman sources kind of go, there was meant to be a negotiation and Shapur was treacherous and he took him during the negotiation and they nabbed him and they ran. They're like, no, hold on. It's just such a horrible defeat. They have him and they're not sure exactly what to do with him. It's rumored that when Valerian was captured, he was then used as the official royal footstool for King Shapur. So if I need to, I need to climb on this horse, bring the royal footstool. And he would just climb on Valerian and then hop onto the horse. Or he's having a seat and bring the royal footstool.
I think it says a lot about the change in balance of power that they're not even looking for a ransom or something. They're just humiliating him.
I think it's the Romans were kind of a little bit annoyed. They weren't exactly willing to pay one for him. Yeah. So it's kind of like, I need to get the most usage out of my my emperor. So anyway, it's rumored then that when Valerian dies, they have him stuffed and they keep him. So it's one of these like almost Big Lebowski thing. He's tying the room together, just an imperial taxidermy. It's like, oh my God, Jesus. But yeah, that's the fate of this Roman emperor. We don't know fully sure. A lot of it is probably speculation and rumors, but I think it's just such a fun, absolute baller maneuver from Sharpur to use him as furniture, and then eventually when he dies, stuff him.
Continue using him as furniture.
yeah.
He was my favorite piece of furniture, and I'm not giving that up now.
Yeah. So with the capture of Valerian, there's going to create some serious issues immediately. A much more competent emperor is about to take over, and that's Gallienus. Now, like, the removal of Valerian is going to kick off a sequence of events. This Battle of Odessa, it's going to trigger the absolute decline. This is where it's going to just free fall for the moment. So the first part that's going to happen is the western section of the empire has had a myriad of issues. Now, most of these have stemmed from either an inability of whoever was the Roman emperor to solve whatever military or economic problems could happen on the western borders, or just simply neglect the western section. Now, for example, if the Romans were experiencing issues with the east, they'd often pull troops from the west, and this would leave a big gap in the western border, and then tribes or confederations across the border would exploit this with raids. Now, by the time the emperor is going to address the problem in the west, he's often going to pull troops from another section, and then the damage will already be done from the raiding and, the pillaging, and whatever section he's just pulled troops from is probably going to fall under attack. So because the emperor needs to make sure he doesn't have a threat of someone else getting legions and declaring themselves emperor, he often has to stay with the bulk of the army. So if he's in the east dealing with something and there's a problem in the west, he has to move to the west and try and deal with that. And then by the time he gets there logistically, the damage is done and somewhere else is under. So it's a constant firefighting with an inability to deal with the problem. And never being able to quite fix any single problem, the emperor would almost always create another problem trying to fix a previous problem. So if the emperor did delegate command to a local commander, they risked creating a usurper, so that has its big problems. So the western section was experiencing really sluggish help from the central government, and eventually, after Valerian is captured by the Sassanids, they go, we're just breaking away. You can no longer function as a government for what we need. For the latest campaign in the east, Valerian had taken the cream of the crop of the western troops with him. Now, he didn't use them well, clearly showed. It didn't go well, and he ended up losing viciously. So the western section naturally is wide open from exploitation from an absolute, galore of different types of tribes and troops. So they're under attack. Now, however, somehow with the remaining troops of what was little left over, a commander, Marcus Cassianus Latinus Posthumus, or simply Posthumus for short. He manages to defend the exposed gap with very limited resources and troops. Now, as a reward, he wants to kind of, sort out his troops with the spoils of the tribes they defeated. Now, however, Salonius, who was a high-ranking Roman left in charge by Valerian of the West, and his Praetorian prefect Silvanus, they demanded that whatever booty was collected is going to be recovered and brought to him. Posthumus is I can't have these guys perform above and beyond and then have you just take from them. Now, I have an army and you kind of don't, so let me just start besieging you. So he besieges Salonius and Silvanus, and after breaching the walls of the city, Posthumus has Silvanus and Salonius killed. Now, this combined with the capture of Valerian results in the Gallic provinces declaring Posthumus their emperor. This time it's a little bit different, because normally it's we've declared you imperator, and he goes, now I'm going to control Rome and Greece and all the areas that we control. This time it's very different. They're going to break off the Gallic provinces and the areas around them. So they're going to form a new empire, a new setup. Now, the Gallic Empire includes the equivalent of modern-day France, Spain, parts of Germany, and parts of Britain. So it is huge. It's a new splinter empire, and it's colossal, but it's an empire trying to deal with just its own territory. It doesn't want to have to do anything with the Sassanids. It doesn't want to have to do anything with the East. It is going to be its own thing. Interestingly, after they break off, they don't go all Celtic Germanic and, bring back tribes and druids and that kind of thing. They form their own senate, and they elect their own consuls, and they have their own emperor, and they mint their own Roman coins, and they have Roman laws and Roman culture, and they are really thoroughly Latinized. So they still want to be Roman, but they just want to kind of have the autonomy to sort themselves because they're just tired of the inefficiencies of the centralized, sluggish Roman government. If the current Roman Empire was just able to act more efficiently with less centralized control, this split would not have happened.
Yeah, it's not based on like cultural differences or peasant uprising or anything. It is just like, you're too incompetent, we're just going to go off and do our own thing.
Yeah, it's kind of like if you know, it's one of these things. We have a problem, and 2 years later, someone comes back because I heard you had a problem. It's like, well, no, not anymore. Oh, that's good. Then why did you have to call me? You know, it's it's the time to fix it. The problem is just so outrageously slow that it's completely pointless. That's why bother even have these troops if they're just not going to be used effectively. So anyway, Postumus now, their emperor. And just to show another example of how Roman they are, Postumus makes himself a consul and he makes himself the Pontificus Maximus. He doesn't make himself chief druid. Like that's, it's where they're going. They are thoroughly Latinized. So after the Battle of Odessa, where they had the colossal defeat and the West broke off in 260 AD, the eastern section of the empire also breaks away from Rome. So the West has broken off, the East is about to break off, and the centre is left. Now, Shapur takes advantage of his recent big wins and he sacks a reported 30 Roman cities in the East. And he's taken these settlements, he's heading on home, and he's absolutely laden with gold and booty. They're bringing it all back, and this is going to be a great kind of thing. Now, there's a region out in the East, the region of Palmyra. And this is a very interesting region because it's an oasis town. It's an oasis city. It's in the desert. Okay, it's a bottleneck along the Silk Road for travelers and merchants. So it's sought about by just about everybody. Everyone wants to. The Persians want to control it. The Sassanids want to control it. The Romans want to control it. And Palmyra is because it's that bottleneck of trade from the Silk Road. So you're literally getting trade as far as China funneling through here. Everyone wants control of it. Now, Rome, to kind of sweeten the region and make sure that you kind of stay with us and be good, show a little bit of loyalty, they make the locals citizens. If you remember back in the Sulla episodes, the Romans had civil wars over citizenship, so the idea to go, hey, this town, you all just get to be citizens, you get to have votes and you get to have, certain amount of representation and you're that much more important. So we've made you citizens because we're trying to, just entice you to stay. With Rome losing against the Sassanids, the Palmyrans get a bit nervous. This is where we're going to be introduced to Septimius Odenathus. Now, Septimius has had a great career in the East, and he was a respectable and very capable commander. He gathers what forces he can, and he attacks the Sassanids while they're hauling off all of their, spoils of war. So it's a great win for the eastern section of the empire. It's kind of acting on his own, initiative, pulling forward, doing what he needs to do, and kind of going, they're literally taking stuff and they're going home. They're laden with goods. We can strike, so we might as well. And he can only do this because he takes the initiative to do so. Odenathus officially breaks off Palmyra as an independent kingdom. The new Roman emperor Gallienus is too occupied to deal with this. Now, this is just the level of bureaucracy and the inefficiency of the Roman army to be in many places at the same time. So begrudgingly, he just lets this happen. He's like, okay, I guess you're independent. There appears to be some kind of legitimacy in this new rule because it's unopposed. There's not much I can do about this. The West is just after breaking off. The East is after breaking off. I can't be two places at once. I'll just not even acknowledge you, but I won't condemn this. Gallienus is trying to hold all of this together, but the scope of the imperial problems is just too much for one person. Now, Septimus's management of the East is saving the Roman Empire from having to deal with the eastern threats. Because there's actually a very capable person there, there's now a bit of a buffer where it's like, I don't need to actually worry as much about the East because there is somebody who's broken off. They haven't declared themselves emperor of all the territory I have control of, but at least they're a buffer. So there's a bit of a double-edged sword here. I'm getting the advantages and the disadvantages of it, but that's where Gallienus is at the moment.
They've lost it, but it's not actively hostile, whereas the things beyond kind of are. So
Yeah. Septimius Odenathus is left with Palmyra. So that's his for the moment. We'll see what's going on. So not to be outdone as well, another emperor is declared near the Danube. Now, he is Regulianus, and he is very, very short-lived. Now, I mean short-lived, like, it could be a week, it could be a couple of months. It's not much. Now, to show how unimportant he is, and this pretty much captures the crisis of the 3rd century, of the flavour and the air of it, he is either killed by invading steppe tribes, the Roxolani, or his own men. Doesn't matter. He's that. It's that short-lived.
But
You know,
for those couple of weeks, he really was emperor of that frontier area of the empire along the Danube.
Yeah. There's another couple of few upstarts as well. So there's another gentleman, Macrianus. Now, he has two sons. He has Macrianus the Younger and Quietus. And Macrianus, who is in Palmyra, he declares his two sons, Macrianus the Younger and Quietus, as Augustus. Now, he doesn't declare himself as Augustus, and he probably could have, but he's meant to have a deformed leg, so he didn't. But like that hasn't stopped other people. Like Vitellius, the really fat emperor in the year of the four emperors, he was meant to have a deformed leg or a broken leg as well from a chariot accident. Generally, deformities, though, don't stop somebody declaring themselves Augustus or emperor, but he kind of goes, I'm just going to go straight to my kids. You know, they're going to be Augustus. So that is happening. Macrianus, he takes himself and, Macrianus Jr., they take 30,000 troops from the east and they try and take sections of the Roman Empire. Quietus is left to the east, just to kind of stay at home and mind the place. Now, Septimius isn't involved in this, but, it's important to note that there is like a subsection of the east that's like, we want to take little sections and capitalize on the gains. Gallienus has a cavalry commander named Aureolus. Now, Aureolus mops these guys up and he kills the two Macrianuses. Now, we don't have a lot of information on this, so it's not in the database. As a sign of good faith to the west, Septimius Odeanthus has Quietus killed. So the guy they left at home, he goes, I'm just going to kill him.
He definitely wasn't the favourite son, though.
No,
like, he named the first one after himself and he named the second one Quietus. Like, that's... and told him to stay at home. Like...
you should be seen and not heard.
I think if they'd done that before he died, he still wouldn't have cared.
Yeah. God, yeah. So, but to safely say, the East is now in that awkward kind of, a small subsection of us tried to conquer a part, but you mopped them up quickly. I didn't have anything to do with this, just to show my loyalty or, whatever. Not to have the hostility. I'll kill the other guy. That's fine. Don't worry about it. So you can see this, the spinning plates of the political madness. Now, Gallienus directs his wrath now to the Gallic breakaway. And he does this in like 261 or 266. We're not sure, but like there could be one or two combined campaigns. But it's what's going on. Whatever's going to happen now is he's going to direct his wrath towards the Gallic breakaway empire. Now, in the campaign, Gallienus is shot with an arrow. This hinders his ability to keep going. Now, we don't have info for this battle to talk about in detail, but somehow, after a good win, Gallienus's commander Aureolus, he drops the ball somehow fighting the Gallic army, and various commanders get away. Now this infuriates Gallienus and he can no longer capitalize on the win, so he demotes Aureolus. Now we don't know what Aureolus did wrong. He might have, not run them down after the battle. He might have not pursued them. He might have been, holidaying in France. We don't know. But whatever happened, it was kind of deemed as like, damn it, we won this battle. We should have mopped them up. You let him go. The cavalry commander gets the blame for this. Like, maybe the blame is being passed. We're not sure. But he does get demoted. So that's important.
I think it's also interesting that for Gallienus, we only have good enough data for a couple of his battles. They're both good ones that he won. We don't seem to have data for this one, whereas it all went a bit wrong. So,
yeah.
Don't write that one down.
Me.
Yeah, we don't have enough to establish him as like a good or bad general. But the two battles that are in there, it was a good win. They were favorites, but not by a huge amount. Took on and beat the general who was the one who commanded against Decius, the emperor who died. So probably a nice sense of catharsis for Rome in that one as well.
Because he gets to survive the battle, the Emperor of the West, Posthumus, he gets to hold on to power. And he goes full-blown local politics when he's managing the West. He's like, okay, I'm just going to stay here. I'm going to sort out, whatever logistics. I'm going to sort out local taxes. I'm going to sort out, building roads. So he's just sitting there managing the area, kind of as if almost the defeat didn't happen. Now, meanwhile, back in the East, Septimius is assassinated. Now, no one is sure how or why this happens. We're hitting rumor town here now. It's not clear who's going to benefit. It's not absolutely set in stone what happened, because there's a rumor, and this is only a possibility, that while they were out on a royal hunt, some youngster was mocked during this hunting trip with Odonitus and friends. Now, don't know what he was mocked for. Maybe he didn't perform well. Maybe they were just making fun of him, whatever it was. But he's meant to have held a grudge and somewhere along the line assassinates him. Now, who knows really what's going on? But whatever happens, Odonitus is assassinated. We no longer have him ruling the East. Now, this is kind of a bit of a problem because Gallienus, kind of just acknowledged that he's kind of in charge there and I'm going to, kind of not even recognize him but ignore him. But now we clearly have a situation of does the empire just fold back in? Is the East just reabsorbed? Was that just a temporary breakaway, or what happens? So who's going to take over and why? There's no clear, succession plan. We don't know what to do. So Septimius's wife, Zenobia, very quickly and effectively takes command, and she rules as the queen regent with her young son as her claim. So she and a general named Zabdas assume control. While people are going, wait a second, what's the line of succession? She just kind of goes, well, that is me. That's it. Let's not have any questions about this. The takeover of the East kind of slides because there's a Gothic horde and they are shooting down through Macedonia and they've sacked Athens and they've sacked Sparta. Now, on a cool note, the Gothic commander at this time is meant to have spared the libraries. So while they're sacking these areas and they have the option to burn the libraries, and the commander kind of goes, hold on a second, you leave these libraries alone. Because at one time, these people were a warlike powerhouse, and then they learned how to read. And if you're learning how to read, you don't have time to become a good warrior. If we destroy their books and their readings, they might become more warlike, and that could be a problem down the line. So, leave them with pen and paper.
Leave these nerds alone.
Yeah. Yeah. We don't want them to exercise, So it's just a fun one where you can imagine the countless records that possibly could have been lost in that situation, but it's just one of these ones of a lot of Greek text survived, and it's because a Gothic warlord was like, leave them alone. Leave them to their books.
There are so many examples throughout history of great libraries or stores of knowledge being destroyed for really stupid reasons. It's nice to see one preserved also for a kind of stupid reason.
But anyway, so Gallienus has to deal with this. Because he's recently demoted Aureolus, he leaves him in Milan, and he takes his new cavalry commander, Aurelian, along with him to deal with the Gothic problem. We'll come to Aurelian at another point, but just to mention that this is the new shiny cavalry commander. Aureolus is left to deal with one eye on the Gallic Empire just in case they try anything, and he's to keep his other eye on any potential invasion in northern Italy, just in case any tribes or confederations, as they do, take advantage of the Roman army moving from A to B. Now, instead of doing this, he uses his newfound independence to immediately revolt.
Of course
he does. So he uses that time to immediately revolt. Now, very quickly, Gallienus and cavalry commander Aurelian, they defeat the Goths and the Alemanni tribes, and this is at the Battle of Nisus.
So I mentioned Gallienus had 2 battles in the database and missing that one where everything kind of went a bit wrong. This one, I think, has the best rating of his battles, so maybe that does have something to do with Aurelian there as one of the sub-commanders influencing things. But this is one where Rome, it wasn't a sure victory, but they were given the advantage. They were considered favourites, but not by much. It was close to 50-50. So it was a good win over expectation for Rome. They dealt out a lot more casualties than expected, about 36% more, and took slightly fewer than expected as well. So this is kind of Rome starting to look a bit more back on form.
Now, Cathal, you'll find this interesting because you were attributing possibly Aurelian. But what it's attributed to how they win this battle is Aurelian, as the cavalry commander, does a feigned flight of his cavalry, wheels him around and countercharges. And that is deemed to what has, saved the game. Battle. So it's funny that you go, maybe the coattails here kind of a thing. If there's an up and comer and he's doing quite well, and that is Aurelian. So it's a handy cavalry trick they have, in their list of options. So it's funny that you kind of go, oh yeah, maybe it was Aurelian, and you go, you know what?
Yeah, it was.
Yeah. So after this quick victory, Gallienus wheels back fast and besieges Aureolus. Shortly after this, we're hitting a bad one. Gallienus's officers pull together, they form a plot, and this is while the besieging is happening. and they're going to have him killed. So it's not expected. There's no clear motive. This is the 3rd century in action. There's a myriad of reasons that are a possibility. No one can be sure. Aurelian is likely involved in this coup. We're not sure. But a Claudius Gothicus is quickly established as the new emperor. The new emperor, now declared, looking at the besieged city, he says, listen, hand over Aurelius or everybody dies. So the city, very cleverly, hands over their commander and he is executed. So, it's good policy.
Fort sensible.
Fort sensible. So the new emperor now, our Claudius Gothicus, he's going to deal with the invaders at the Battle of Lake Benicus. Claudius Gothicus and the cavalry commander Aurelian win. They're using this nice cavalry trick to help them. What's funny about that is, they win this battle, but when they do, this will show how many problems that the Romans have at this time. They're going to settle some of the defeated Goths in the empire. Now, if they had just come to these people first, it's very hypothetical, and gone, listen, do you want to live on these lands? And they go, yeah, okay. Do you want to become part of the Roman Empire? Okay, that's fine. Then do that. You've got to promise some stuff. But by defeating the enemy, and this is going to be a common thing of Aurelian, they will capture troops and go, listen, we can settle some of you. We will use you with troops. We'll get mostly cavalry from you because we need cavalry, and you can just be part of the empire, and when we call you, you do what you're meant to do. It's kind of an incredible thing, but you'll see that the Roman Empire is suffering from a lot of problems. Manpower is now becoming one of them. It wasn't a thing at the time. Auxiliaries it used to not be a problem. The legionaries used to be able to churn out troops and troops and troops. The Romans historically did so well against Pyrrhus of Epirus and Hannibal because they had the manpower to do with it. And we've just hit this point where they don't. And it's the very structure of the legions and the very, the bureaucratic nature of the empire that makes it difficult for them to raise a lot of troops very quickly. So they're actually often conquering areas or defeating enemies and incorporating those enemies into the army.
Which, again, is probably, it's working now in the short term, but when you think about it, like some of their issues, it's just, how do you keep paying these soldiers? How do you keep rewarding them? And now, instead of rewarding them with, slaves, as was the style of the time, obviously not a great way, but it was what was done. Now you're just taking those same people, making them to more soldiers who will then also need payment down the road. And, going better for them now, but it's still not shaking off the underlying issues that are, has caused the last century of disasters, say.
There are such, okay, I'm going to give you another fantastic example of things just starting to fall apart. Back in the West, in the Gallic Empire, a small revolt is put down. Now, the legions involved in putting down this area want to sack this area. Okay? They just put down a revolt, so they ask the emperor, Postumus, can they sack this city? Now, he promptly says no. He's like, why are we sacking our own city? And in response, the legions just kill him. And then they sack it anyway.
So that's showing the alternative to, what I was just saying there. Where it's when you don't reward the soldiers, then sometimes that happens.
Yeah, it just happens. They'll find somebody who will.
Yeah.
So a power vacuum is instantly created by the troops. So they have an oh no moment. Why do we do that? We got to elevate somebody very quickly. So a fellow of the name of Marcus Aurelius Marius just happens to be there. And he is willing to let the troops sack the city and the local mines that are nearby. So he's chosen based on, I'm not joking, based on how good his name sounded. I'm going to say that again. Marcus Aurelius Marius. That's an imperial name.
Yeah, you do hear that and you assume that's one of the important ones that you're supposed to remember.
Yeah.
But also I feel like we've talked before a lot about how there only seem to be half a dozen names going around Rome, so...
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe they had other options.
Maybe they did. But, okay, so because he's got a great name, but he's not a good emperor, in less than 2 months he's killed by his legions, and a one Marcus Pievonius Victorianus is elected. Possibly not for his name, but this is it's so ridiculous. So Victorianus is the new emperor of Gallic Rome. After this death of Postumus, and the madness that ensues with the electing an emperor because he's got a nice name.
It's better than Quietus. I'll go back and say that again.
Yeah, I suppose. Yeah, if you got the option. But after the death of Postumus, the province of Hispania, which is like modern day Spain, they break off and they rejoin the Roman Empire, like the OG one. And they're just going to rejoin it and go, okay, we don't want to be part of this chaos anymore, right? So the Roman Empire, along with the breakaway Spain, now kind of go, we'll convince some other regions and provinces to break off with us, because we don't want to be back in this. So little sections around Germany also break off as well. You can see the Gallic Empire is not doing too well. Claudius Gothicus catches the plague and dies in 270 AD. So it's very likely that what he caught was smallpox, but it just means he's short-lived. Now, the overwhelming favourite to take over is Aurelian. Claudius, though, has a brother, and that brother is favoured by the third kingmaker, the Senate. And this brother is Marcus Aurelius Claudius Quintillus, and we're just going to call him Quintillus for short. The legions in Italy proclaim Quintillus the new emperor. So this is with the Senate's backing, with the whatever, they're like, we reckon this is our candidate we're putting forward as emperor. Now, the Danube legions, which are acknowledged this time as the best legions, they proclaim Aurelian the emperor instead. Let us go into the person of Aurelian and look at him proper. So Aurelian is an Illyrian commander. He's one of these commanders that were the next few emperors are all going to be known as the barracks emperors, and they're going to be Illyrian commanders. So they are like modern day Croatia. That side, they're around that kind of area, you know, a little bit like below the Danube, near, you know, above Greece, around that area. This region, in the Illyrian region, is going to produce the next few emperors, and they're known as the barracks emperors because none of them have any political background. They all have extensive military experience. They are all battle-hardened commanders. That is what they bring to the table. It is a complete might makes right situation. Now, Aurelian comes from peasant stock in the Illyrian province of the empire. He's almost certainly joined the legions as a method to advance his status, because really, he didn't have any other options. You know, it's one of the whole, you can join the legions or you can, you know, stay doing what you're doing, whatever that might be. It's not exactly like it's a big trade hub. It's your best option. So at this time, meritocracy was really highly rewarded. The empire cannot afford, and this happened all the time, they can't afford to put some blue-blooded novice commanding legions and just to have him go, sorry, I just lost a couple of legions, don't worry about it, maybe I'll claim my win, we'll come back again later, amn't I great, let's have a triumph. They can't afford this.
They used to be able to for quite a long time, but
they used to be able to just throw wave after wave of men at the problem, but they can't do that anymore. So the empire can ill afford to put incompetent people in charge of positions. So they're finding, this is one of the rare moments of, you know, the ancient world where you go, like, the nobility is kind of bypassed quite a bit. You will find that you could start off at this point in time as a foot soldier, a regular everyday auxiliary troop, or a regular everyday legionnaire. And you could find yourself in charge of suddenly 10 men, and then in charge of 100, and then in charge of like a whole, you know, legion, and then in charge of multiple legions. You were rewarded based on your ability because you were able to do that. To put it down, the environment is too dangerous to have any of these blue-blooded people in charge. So low-born, competent legionnaires can just be fired up this chain of command, and they were. Now, Aurelian's nickname, just to put him in perspective, was sword in hand, or, you know, hand on the hilt. It's the idea that he was always known to be ready to go. He was always known that he was tough, he was disciplined, he's focused, he's driven. He's an absolutely no-nonsense anti-corruption commander. Now, if he wasn't so talented at leading troops, there's no doubt that he'd just be a hated individual. He'd be that absolute awful boss who just, you know, drives you so hard. But because he's talented and intelligent and capable, and I know this is something you see all the time in business, oh, you really want to be a leader, but he's actually a leader. His men love him because there's nothing that, you know, he's asking them to do that he's not able to do himself.
I mean, if someone's anti-corruption in this era, they have to have something going for them to not have been killed, like, within a month of gaining command.
Good point. Very good point. Yeah. His men love him, and he's super competent. So at this time, he worked his way all the way up to second in command. After the Danube legions, as we said, at this time acknowledged as the best legions, Aurelian very quickly moves south to Italy to deal with Quintilius. Quintilius and his legions get extremely nervous that he's just coming, right? They know there's probably going to be a battle, so they don't even have a battle. The legions get very nervous, very frightened, and one of two things happens. Either Quintilius commits suicide or his troops just kill him. and go, hey, sorry, he's dead now. But either way, the legions hand over the body to Aurelian, and they recognize and, declare him imperator, and they swear their allegiance, and they say, you don't need to worry about anything. You can head back up north, and you can deal with your tribes. That's fine. Please, leave us alone. We didn't want anything to do with this.
So that's what happens when your only backing's the Senate rather than any of the military wings of the power structure.
Yeah. And you don't have any good legions. It's like, yeah, this is why you get the Praetorian Guard and the legions on your side. So meanwhile, around this time in the east, Zenobia decides to go on the offensive, and she annexes Egypt. Now, this is a very, very big problem. Egypt is the breadbasket of the empire. It is so important that in the time of Augustus, it was declared a province that was the sole responsibility of the emperor. That it's like, this is my province, everything else is owned by, but this is my personal piece of land because it produces the food for the empire. Suddenly, the Alemanni, who we haven't really gone into talks, there are various different tribes, across the Rhine and around the area, and a lot of them have things in common. The Alemanni roughly translate as all of the men. So the idea is it's meant to be like a real rainbow coalition of different troops, different cultures, different tribes, kind of all put together in a blender and fired out. So you get different kinds of troops, different kind of things. But the tribes up north have different things going for them. The Germanic tribes tend to, at this time, have really good infantry and good cavalry. But their infantry is good because they've kind of rubbed off from connection with the Romans to pick up general tactics, to pick up how to maneuver troops. Even, and you'll find this fun, Cathal, the Tetsudo tortoise formation that the Romans are famous for, at this time, the Germans are practicing it.
Cool.
Yeah, they're just kind of like, well, why not? It's really good. So the Germans can now fight at this point, like in a phalanx. They can fight a Tetsudo tortoise formation. They have, they can fight in a wedge formation. So they're clearly more and more organized. They're becoming better at their infantry, and they still have a good arm for cavalry. But cavalry all along northern Europe and as far out, towards Asia, is getting seriously good. You'll have different kinds of cavalry. Obviously, the cataphracts is a big thing, and they're sporadic around everywhere. You'll find the Sarmatian tribes. You'll find places near Armenia. You'll find a lot of places that are really getting good usage out of heavy armored cavalry. You'll also get troops that have a lot of kind of bow cavalry. You'll get a lot of troops that have a lot of light cavalry. You'll get it in different kingdoms and different regions have their advantages. Some are really cavalry heavy, and usually those ones have terrible infantry or very light infantry, and then you'll have others, different collections, different kind of things. So the Germans have actually quite good infantry and reasonable cavalry. The Alemanni have a little bit of everything, and a lot of the other tribes, have a connection to kind of the Sarmatians, and you'll get a lot of kind of good cavalry but light troops, and you go, okay. Anyway, Zenobia has gone on the offensive. She's annexed Egypt, and the Alemanni have invaded Italy, and they begin sacking everything they've come across. Now, Aurelian gathers what troops he has, and he rushes headfirst, fast south. Now, he barrels towards the Alemanni to deal with them. Now, the reasoning is they are very confident that Rome is going to be sacked. There isn't enough troops there to defend it. They don't have the ability there, and he's just moved the army. So suddenly, like a war band is barreling south towards Rome, and he needs to follow them. This is to stop the potential sacking of Rome. Rome has not been sacked by a foreign power, because obviously they have civil wars, but even then, they don't sack it. They just, they might have a battle nearby or somebody comes in or whatever it might be. But Rome has not been sacked by a foreign power for 600 years at this point. The last successful attempt was after the Battle of Allia by Brennus, who's the king of the Gauls, in 390 BC. So it's about 600 years since that has happened. And Aurelian, along with other people, you do not want to be known as the emperor who let Rome be sacked. This could, they could strip the city of everything. You've no idea how bad this could be. So it's this absolute alarm bell. So Aurelian panics and barrels south, and along the way, he's actually ambushed by the Alemanni. That is going to lead to the Battle of Placentia in 271. Now, Cathal, what does the history machine think about this battle?
So this one I think is interesting because the result is the Alemanni win. They were very much expected to win by the history machine. It's a case where Rome were kind of caught off guard. They were rushing. They were exhausted. They didn't maybe have the size of army that they needed. It's this era, so there are 5 crises going on at any time. You've constantly trying to bat away different invaders, and the Alemanni took advantage of this. However, despite the loss, Aurelian dealt out 58% more casualties than expected, while taking slightly fewer than expected himself. So even though they really didn't have a hope of winning this, they did massive damage in the process to the Alemanni army, just to, I suppose, stop it progressing at the rate it had been.
Oh my god, that's actually madness, because this is I'm going to follow up with something now after this, but I'm surprised. I thought this was going to be a big upset, but anyway, because right after this, Aurelian, they somehow survive, and whatever he has left of his army, they scrape it together, they reassemble, and they follow the Alemanni, and they're going to have another battle. So Cathal, this is going to be the second battle with Aurelian's pulled together army that aren't caught on the hop this time. They're not caught by surprise. This is the Battle of Fano. What does the history machine think this time, now that Aurelian was able to pull together and they're not really caught in an ambush or by surprise?
This one now looks a lot more like Aurelian's typical battles.
Okay.
He wins in a situation where he's favourite, not overwhelming so, but it's, maybe to say 68-70% chance of winning. He deals out massive casualties again, 58% more than expected, takes slightly fewer himself. So this is when he's kind of given the resources to operate as he likes to rather than being ambushed, and kind of take battle as he likes to rather than being ambushed. You see that he's kind of back to the other battles that we've seen him in.
Yes.
Just winning very comfortably in a battle that, is obviously suited the Romans because they are given the advantage, but it's not overwhelming odds. This isn't something that some of the other Roman generals over the last 100 years necessarily could have pulled off.
Okay. So it's very much that, it's not to say only he could have done it, but like it does take a different caliber of human being to do that, and he's very much
I think for the number of battles he's in, there aren't many others who could have won as often as he did. I think the others would have taken more losses along the way. They might have been a bit more 50-50.
Yes. So anyway, after this fabulous win at the Battle of Fano, he has another very quick battle, the Battle of Pavia. Now that's like, as in the retreating Alemanni army are heading up north, and he's like, no, hold on, you don't get to get away. So what does the history machine think of the second battle?
Almost the exact same stats as the Battle of Fano. Again, like, comfortable win, expected to win, but not definitely going to. Big casualties again, dealt out to the Alemanni army. He's making sure they are not, like, they're not going to have anything left to counterattack with after this. Yeah.
So shocking. As I said, he had the loss, but it really feels like not to try and make a boxing equivalent, but the whole it's best out of 3 here kind of a thing. We'll see what we do. You won the first one, so we have to fight at least 2 more times so I can show I'm better.
Yeah, and he made sure to do enough damage at the first one, even though he lost, that there was going to be no.
He still had hope or a bit of a chance.
2 and 3.
Yeah, that's excellent. So, needless to say, well, I'm going to say it anyway, but in 271 AD, Aurelian enters Rome as a hero. So it's like, hooray! This place wasn't sacked. Thank you very, very much. So he has 2 things on his agenda now that he's in Rome. So first thing is he wants to sort out this debasement of, silver percentages on his coins problem. This has been going on for years, and a bit of it was it was known to the emperors the coins were being debased. What was unknown to them was just how much they were being debased. So for Aurelian, he finds out, or he's going to find out, that the mint workers and the officials in charge of inspecting the mint workers have been skimming even more silver off the top than anyone could have ever expected. Out of fear, knowing that this is a very anti-corruption individual, they organise protests and they organise riots, and they get it with the help of some of the senators who probably aren't too, stuffed that their candidate didn't get to become emperor. And of course, Rome is low on food because they've just lost Egypt. Now there's going to be riots organised by this. Now Aurelian discovers this conspiracy and he is not happy. You're about to see how he deals with corruption. He purges everyone involved in this conspiracy, and he spares everyone else in the city.
I mean, when Isaac Newton was put in charge of the mint in England, and with similar issues, he just added ridges to the coins so people couldn't snip them off. I don't think he considered killing everyone who did. I suppose both work, but
Yeah.
Jesus.
Yeah, it's pretty bad. So he's purged everyone involved. Now, his next action is he closes the mint in Rome. It's kind of, this place has shown to be so corrupt and so untrustworthy, this mint, that it's not going to be here anymore. Now, this is a big shock to anybody. They're like, so you're telling me Rome is not going to be making Roman coins? And you go, yeah, not happening. So that's sorted. The next item on his agenda is to build walls around the city of Rome. Now, for too long, Rome has been exposed and unprotected, for the event of any kind of a siege. Effectively, because of the way the empire worked, imagine there was a crust of legionnaires protecting anything getting through. But if you broke through, if you were a tribe that broke through, you could just, as we've seen just here, completely raid the empire and do what you wanted until you were stopped by some legions. Now, Aurelian is adamant that he goes, Rome used to be a small city-state. Then it expanded, and it never really had to worry too much about, being put under siege or having that many problems. And eventually in the imperial state, it's like, it's just a metropolis. It doesn't have any military function at all, really. It's where the rich live and where, the poor live in the slums kind of thing. That's what it is. It's just now a big metropolis. But now it's like, it's beyond that. It goes, I can't have a situation where this whole capital could be sacked. So we need to start building walls around it. And he encourages other cities, other areas, to do exactly the same thing. So we're seeing this transformation now closer to the feudal age, where you go, cities are important places of commerce and, and centers, for decisions and policy making, but they're walled, they're protected, they have turrets, they have towers, they have garrisons, they have troops. Now, not that didn't exist, but it's going to be cemented in Italy and areas around it. So for too long, Rome had been completely exposed and unprotected, and kind of like as I said, very similar to the feudal thing, like the Normans 1,000 years later, they recognized the importance to be able to fall back to a fortified location. So it's just
like it's always been done, but now this is like a centerpiece of the military philosophy.
Yes.
Kind of.
Yeah. Going to go back a little bit, just across the east. Zenobia had taken Egypt, so the eastern section of the Roman Empire now controls Egypt, and along the way, Zenobia has gotten recognition from the Syrian and Asian provinces to put them under Palmyrian rule. So the east is now firmly established. We are our own thing, our own empire. We are definitely, like in open revolt or openly independent and taking territories that belong to you. So Aurelian turns his attention towards the Palmyrian Empire. He marches his troops across modern-day Turkey. Now, along the way, he cleans up some Gothic invaders. And a little bit of a side note, but along the way, he almost certainly kills an old Gothic king called Sineva, and he avenges the death of the emperor. If this is the case, that he kills this war leader, almost certainly then has avenged the death of the Roman Emperor Decius. So it's just a fun little thing of, like, along the way, he fought a Gothic tribe and killed a very similarly named king. There's a good chance it's the same guy. So, it's just kind of a side note to put there, but he's adding, he's adding different awards to his name there. He then decides to, and this is where we're thoroughly talking about the decline of the Roman Empire. As much as he's pulling these pieces together, right? What his plan here is, he goes, the province of Dacia has no major resources, has been mined for whatever value was there, and has been the entry point for countless tribal invasions. It is time to just get the Roman people, pull them out of there, allow some friendly tribes to settle, and let them be a buffer zone, and just leave it, abandon the province. And we pull back. Now, this is the first time ever where Rome has voluntarily just given up territory. They have lost it before, and they've reconquered it. There's times where there's a little bit of a back and forth and an ebb and flow, but they've never had a situation where they go, we're just giving this territory up. They'll do the same with Britain later. It's just a thing of, it's not worth keeping anymore. It's too much of a strain on the resources. So for the first time ever, they have contracted and given up a region. They've left the buffer zone, but they've abandoned the territory. So this is clearly the decline, as much as he's holding it together.
So this one cements, again, that he's just very, very consistent he had a win over expectation of about 34%. So, 2/3 chance of winning this outright, and went and did that, dealt out much bigger casualties than expected, 45% more than expected.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, just another very comfortable win for him. But it is interesting, as you say, just that it's with the eventual intention then of just leaving it as a buffer zone.
Yeah.
I suppose not for the last time that the area that's now Romania gets just kind of left to be a buffer between very big superpowers.
Sorry to any Romanian listeners. That sounds awful. Oh, you should be ashamed of yourself.
But yeah, it is interesting, just like he's putting in these very big kind of, very strong victories, but ultimately with the strategy just being to downsize.
Yeah. The empire is too big now. Even though you kind of go comparatively to other places, it's not other historical empires, but they kind of go, it's just not what we want.
And I guess it does show as well that this is, like, you've had Rome kind of, it has its ebbs and flows, and sometimes you'll have a terrible leader cause a bit of a crisis, but then an equally good one comes along later and kind of re-cements it and gets it back on track. But now you're just seeing they have this incredible military leader and reformer, and it's looking like it's just not enough. Like, there's been too many underlying issues for any one person to solve, and it's going to have to step back, even as he does, as much as he can or as anyone has done in a century or more.
Yeah. No, that's very fair. Actually, out of curiosity, I know we kind of went a little bit into the stats. What are the stats for Aurelian to capture or kill a commander in this one? Because he gets Cineva.
Oh, like the history machine basically almost always assumes you're not going to do it. So, yeah, so that's another something that he doesn't necessarily do in other battles, but it is another boost to his stats, definitely.
That's class. It's very impressive. So, after dealing with the Goths in Dacia, Aurelian detaches a part of his army and he has them sail towards Egypt to retake it. Now, we don't know the specifics about this, but what does happen is it's very quickly taken back. So, food problem solved. Okay? So with the army he has left, Aurelian bulldozes his way across Asia Minor. Now, what he does is interesting. He offers clemency to all of the cities who do not oppose them, and he proposes the threat of complete and utter annihilation to those who don't. Now, one city kind of, so this is really going against the East. The East are kind of hoping that, like, listen, he's going to have to take city after city after city. We have time to pull the stuff together or get more troops or do what we need to do. We don't expect him just to run across and gun for us. And the fact that, if he tries to do that and there's cities behind him, they'll just, they can attack him from behind. So it's a win-win for us kind of a situation. So by him, either threatening to completely annihilate and then offer clemency, one city decides that, they are not going to surrender. Okay? But funnily, Aurelian offers clemency anyway. Now, he claims he's had a vision as a part. It's like a step outside of the tent kind of thing. I just had a vision, and as part of a dream, and this is probably staged, he kind of goes, we should completely annihilate these people. But in my dream, I came to the conclusion that, I was told by a deity, I'm totally not making this up as I go along, that I should spare this city. And because of that, because he offered the clemency anyway, it sends a clear message that he actually intends no harm. So he was threatening with violence, if they didn't do it. But then, when they resist, he kind of gives some clemency anyway, but doesn't, break character, doesn't do whatever. So that sends a clear message to anyone that you can cooperate with this man. He will play ball. And that allows Aurelian just to bulldoze his way straight across and head deep into the Palmyrian Empire to have a decisive...
Again, like after 200 years of just like so much treachery and corruption and so many assassinations, having someone who actually keeps their word must have been massively refreshing.
Yeah. Okay, this is where Aurelian is going to deal with the Palmyrian Empire, and he's going to have a decisive win. So the Palmyrians have a world-class heavy cavalry. They have the cataphracts. This is the cream of the crop, the cream of their army, and they are to account for the lion's share of their victories and their kills. Aurelian decides for this battle he's going to incorporate one of his old cavalry tricks that he used against the Goths. So during this battle, Aurelian organises his cavalry to have a charge. Now, he's a cavalry commander, so he's very familiar with cavalry. So he organizes a charge, and then as they approach the cataphracts, they seemingly get chaotic and panic and retreat, and his lighter cavalry runs off. Now, the very heavy cataphracts very eagerly pursue him. And they go, this is it. His cavalry is beaten. Let's go. We'll run them down. We'll cut them to pieces. We're the best, we're the best cavalry here. This is how we win the battle. This is what we do. They don't catch them, though. Aurelian's cavalry are just out of range all the time, and it's like, damn it, and they just keep doing it. And in the hot sun, and over the long, continuous pursuit, Aurelian's cavalry have tired out the heavy cavalry. Now, once they're exhausted, there is a very definitive and organised countercharge. And in this result, the countercharge from Aurelian's well-disciplined, put-together, functional and not tired cavalry wipe out almost all of the cataphracts. Now, what is left of the Palmyran army is their inferior infantry. Now, if there's one thing the Roman infantry still have, it's their good against infantry. So what's left is, as I said, the inferior infantry of the Palmyrans, and they're cleaned up by the Romans. So Cathal, what does the history machine think of the battle in 272 AD, the Battle of Imahe?
So this one is kind of like Aurelian's other ones, but turned up a bit. His odds, again, he is favoured by the history machine, but not as much as he was in some of the others. Some of the others he was maybe 70% chance. This is down to about 65% chance of winning.
Okay.
The casualties dealt, though, are higher than anything we've seen from him so far. It's 63% casualties dealt over expectation.
Oh, wow.
Which, even by his standards, is a lot. And it's also possibly worth noting as well, though, that the Palmyran army, in their invasion of Egypt, which we didn't go into the history machine for, but it had that invasion, it had them as maybe 50-50 chance of winning, so it was a good win.
Yeah.
But they suffered a lot of casualties, 30% more than expected, so there's maybe some sloppiness in this army that Aurelian was able to exploit with the, false retreats and various other tactics.
Yeah.
Just maybe that they weren't, obviously the cataphracts were a very good unit, but maybe not led the best way they could have been.
Okay.
And yeah, he took advantage of that to a massive extent, dealing, huge casualties and not taking too many himself.
So ultimately, kind of in summary, he did an excellent job. Now, there is a follow-up second battle of what's left of the Palmyran army. Now, this second follow-up battle, Aurelian is going to try the same trick again. He's going to try and lure the cataphracts out, tire them, and countercharge, catch them off. So, feels a little bit like a one-trick pony now at the moment, that it's all he seems to do. Now, in this situation, in this second battle, the Battle of Emesa in 272, the cataphracts catch on to this plan. And they time it, because they are excellent cavalry, to close that gap. So they don't quite pursue them, they let them kind of, we'll bait you, we'll thing, it's just waiting to get close enough to the, to the jaws of the lion so they can, they can bite. So therefore the Roman cavalry is actually engaged, and their plan doesn't go according to plan. And now the heavy cavalry has actually caught them and is cutting into them. Now, this could be the end of the whole thing for Aurelian. Now, his cavalry's still good, but the plan didn't work. They were caught on, and the cataphracts have caught the Roman cavalry. But if you remember, the Romans have the superior infantry. Now, the infantry intervenes, and they're able to deal with the cataphracts, and they deal a decisive blow. Now, they're able to intervene because they're able to deal with the regular Palmyran infantry, and now, they can wheel their attention to the cavalry. So either sign, the Romans have weaker cavalry in this battle than the Palmyrans, but they have much better infantry, and it's the case that the infantry actually get to save the day, which is contrary to the way things are leaning. It seems to be very cavalry heavy, from now on. It's cavalry seems to be the most important, arm of the army. This time, in this battle, the Palmyran leader Zabdas is killed. So, Cathal, what does the history machine think of the Battle of Emesa?
The stats are, and it's interesting, just again, the consistency of Aurelian. The stats are almost the exact same as the Battle of Imahe.
Okay.
Which is interesting. Similar, like, casualties dealt, similar initial win expectations. And I do find it funny as well that, like, the old tactics didn't work, but then when Rome's cavalry started genuinely losing and had to retreat, it kind of almost didn't matter whether it was a false retreat or a genuine one. It's just the cataphracts lost the run of themselves so much that they just got mopped up anyway, in a really similar fashion. So I suppose, it's maybe a different order of operations, maybe different motivations, but I guess a lot of the actions of this battle ended up very much the same, and so the history machine just rates it as a near identical victory stats-wise.
You know what I mean? It's good that they were able to pull it out of the out of the bag, because that could have went really bad. So fair play that they could do it. Now, after this battle, Queen Zenobia sets up a defense in the the oasis, the settlement that is Palmyra. She's kind of stuck because she doesn't really have an army, and she's going to be besieged. But at least she's in an oasis, so like the Romans have logistical problems here if they have to besiege her. But it's only a matter of time. Could take years, but it's only a matter of time. Now, out of fear, she turns to the only people she thinks can help her, the Sassanids. Now, Shapur I had died recently. So the Sassanids, even though they get this, they wouldn't be too eager to help. They've had a lot of internal issues of their own. They're fighting amongst themselves. So a very, very desperate Zenobia organizes an escape to appeal to the Sassanids in person. It's kind of like, if I could just get into a room and talk to these new rulers, I could convince them that, I am their friend and Rome is their enemy, and Palmyra was always, for Team Sassanids. But Aurelian gets wind of this plan. And while she's escaping in the middle of the night to try and meet the Sassanids, he has her intercepted and captured alive. Now, his troops want her executed. They're like, yay, we've captured, the rival queen. This is it. But Aurelian, to the dismay of his troops, is like, this is not going to happen. We're keeping her alive. I have other plans. So he practices his usual merciful clemency now, and he leaves her alone, and he begins heading west. The remaining nobles of Palmyra immediately plan a coup. They're like, Aurelian's gone. We like being independent. We'll hope to install Zenobia's son as a new ruler. That's great. So they go, now that the army's gone, we'll do our own thing. We never really planned to surrender. So they approach the Roman prefect Marcellinus, who's garrisoned in Mesopotamia, and they look for his aid. So they offer him a bit of money in exchange for his help, and they just want to know, hey, are you in or are you out? And Marcellinus pretends to go along, but he immediately notifies Aurelian to buy some time. And to buy some time, he starts delaying the negotiations with the conspirators of like, maybe I want a bit more money, or maybe we should do this, or maybe we should go about that way. In an unrelated situation, I just have to go send a letter. So Aurelian returns kind of just out of the blue, and the horrified nobles are caught red-handed. They can't talk their way out of this one. Now, we're about to see Aurelian's anti-corruption policy in action again. Aurelian kills all of the Palmyrians involved. He leaves everyone else alive, but then he systematically strips Palmyra of all of its wealth. He levels every building to the ground that doesn't have religious connotations, that isn't like a temple or a shrine. And thus, he just ends the region of Palmyra in the future as being a threat ever again. He's like, it's no longer a thing. It's not an important trade port. It's no longer whatever. It is just leveled. It is gone. Let this not be a threat again. So that's how he deals with corruption. So next, Aurelian heads towards Gallic Rome. The Gallic Emperor Victorianus was recently killed, such is the way of the 3rd century. Now, it's possible that... So, we always have different situations, but this is the one where it's possible that he made an advance against another officer's wife, and he was caught and killed by the officer in question. Now, no one's sure, and this is way too much of a historical trope to be fully believed. It's the whole, I approached an officer's wife, and then that officer found out, and then he had me killed, and, it's too much of... like a romance story, or kind of like a cheap pulp novel kind of thing to be fully believed. But that's what's said. The new
I also feel like the 3rd century people have been killed for dumber reasons than this.
That's true. People have been made emperor for
you never know.
Reasons.
There's a lot of stupidity and corruption and ridiculousness happening.
Yeah. So the new emperor of Gallic Rome is a one Gaius Pius Tetricus. Now, we'll just call him Tetricus for short. He also very likely elevated his son Tetricus II, or Tetricus II, to co-emperor. In 274 AD, Tetricus heads north to deal with a guy called Faustinius, and he's a provincial governor of Gallica Belgica. So it's a province in the area. It's kind of modern-day Belgium. Or we can obviously guess what Belgica. So they rebelled against Tetricus, and the revolt was swiftly dealt with. Now, Tetricus's troops want to sack the city. Now, remembering Posthumus, Tetricus says yes. So he lets his troops sack one of his own capitals. Now, such is the madness of the 3rd century.
Yeah.
So in 274 AD, Aurelian enters Gallic Rome with his army. Now, the next battle is quite controversial because no one knows the exact sequence of events. And I'm going to go through some of the possibilities and see what we're going to do. Tetricus and his son are going to possibly defect before, during, or just after this battle to Aurelian's side. Whatever happens, whatever time they agreed, this might have been a pre-arranged, earlier, kind of shady deal. It doesn't feel very Aurelian that he would have done this, kind of on the side.
It does feel a lot, though, like the guy who sacks his own capital city. It does seem like the kind of thing he might do.
Yeah, I think you're right. So this could have been a pre-arranged attempt by, as you're right, Tetricus. So whatever happens anyway, he's going to ensure that Tetricus's life is going to be spared and his son's life is going to be spared. Now, considering they live after all of this, there's a very good possibility that a deal was struck. Or maybe there was a sign of clemency here again. But anyway, what happens is an absolute stunning victory. And we see Aurelian's clemency in action after the battle, just like the capture of Zenobia. But there's a stunning victory where Aurelian is outnumbered, he's outmanned, but his troops are just primed and capable, and they defeat the Gallic Empire. And in the process, capture or organize, to have Tetricus and Tetricus II taking control of. Now, they get, as I said, they get official jobs and everything, so they transition into it, so, it works out well for them. Now this is the madness of the 3rd century. There's a possibility this battle never happened at all. You know what I mean? That it doesn't make sense that it wouldn't happen, but, that's also an option, so I'm throwing that out there. But the Battle of 274 AD, Cathal, what does the history machine think of this engagement?
So this one it's the closest to 50-50 of any of Aurelian's battles as the primary commander.
Okay.
Though part of that might just go with the mystery of this battle, that because, a lot of the numbers are unsure, it's, history machine is kind of hedging its bets and going closer to 50-50. But again, it looks like your typical Aurelian battle, didn't take many casualties, dealt out a lot more than expected, about 44% more than expected. Just, if this battle did happen anyway, it just seems like very standard Aurelian practice. He really just doesn't seem to deviate too much. He deals out a lot of casualties and he wins battles that he's got himself into a good but not certain position for.
Okay, that's very fair. So, after this win, the Gallic Roman Empire is seamlessly reintegrated back into the Roman Empire. Now, when I mean seamlessly, I mean it to the point where people who had official positions in the Gallic Roman Empire get to keep their positions, their ranks, their titles, like their whole career. As in, hey, for the last 10 years, you were this kind of, magistrate in this area. You get to still have that job, and all of your work experience is recognized. So it's the kind of thing of he does what they wanted, in a sense of, we want a competent emperor who will take care of the western section of the empire, who will recognize all of our changes and our and not punish anybody for just rejoining the empire. So the West has now just been thoroughly reincorporated straight back into the Roman Empire. One of the few changes he does make, though, is he has closed the mint in the Gallic Empire, similar to the one he did in Rome, and instead he opens up mints in every major garrison across the empire. Now, there's good reasons to do this. Each of these new mints is near the troops, so it's literally the money is near the people it has to pay. Okay, and each of these new mints is fed orders directly from a central command, aka Aurelian. And this way he can control and standardize all the coins and the silver percentages and spot any differences from a single mint. Because suddenly if he has examples of coins from, some people start complaining and say, the coins from Spain just aren't as good as the coins from Britain. You might go, well then, I know there's something going wrong here in the Spanish mint as opposed to the British one. It's a great way to go. It's a lot harder to bribe all of the officials, to skim a little bit extra up off the top. So if one mint is performing poorly or doing something illegal, they'll be very quickly caught. So it's a great way just to do it. So both the pay is near the troops and it's more difficult to be corrupt. So that's just one of these lasting changes that will really help them out.
And if it is corrupt, it's not going throughout the whole empire.
Yes,
and
very true,
everything.
very true. Yeah, yeah. So now it's time for Aurelian to head back to Rome, literally triumphantly. So he has a glorious triumph, and he celebrates the reunification of the Roman Empire. And in the triumph, he parades through the eastern queen Zenobia, and that is the reason that he kept her alive. Very similar to what Augustus wanted to do with the Cleopatra, or what Caesar did with Vercingetorix. They want to parade the foreign king and royalty or queen through the streets and have a fantastic triumph. Now, I didn't actually mention this, but triumphs are handed out like, afternoon mints in the Roman Empire. It's one of these ones of like, I went over and we engaged a small skirmish of potentially friendly troops, but I'm going to call myself Germanicus now and have a triumph. So this is probably one of the few examples where you go, he reunified the whole empire from the west and the east and then celebrated. If anything was worthy of a triumph, this is. Fair play to him. Aurelian takes on the title of Restitutor Orbis, which literally, now not to sound too modest, literally means restorer of the world. And he also takes the title Invictus, which, means unconquered or undefeated. Point towards the Alemanni. I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
History Machine said he no one else was going to win that battle, so it's fine.
Yeah. And next, he also popularized and made official the following of the Roman god Sol Invictus, so the all-conquering sun, who is also called Helios. Now, he doesn't introduce monotheism, and he doesn't neglect other deities, but he kind of goes out and goes, I'm picking my favorite god, and in a way, he makes a claim that he had divine protection from this god, and this favorite god looked upon him for his career, and, supported him and almost covered him in kind of divine protection kind of a thing. Now, it's very possible that his mother was a devotee of Helios, so it's possible that he just had a favour or a liking for that god along his career and attributed some of his successes to it. As I said, he doesn't exactly make it a monotheistic religion, but it's almost a foundation for later Christianity where they go, there's one important god. There's other things, but there's one important god. That's something they can kind of point to at a later point. What could possibly go wrong? Now, for what's going to go wrong. Some very minor official who worked adjacent to Aurelian, possibly as a secretary, was about to be found out for corruption. Now, with some small charge, something possibly, negligible, we're not sure. I think, if it was another emperor, they could turn a blind eye. But considering Aurelian's responses to corruption historically...
Yeah, he was dead.
Yeah. The official feared what might happen. So out of fear, this nameless official has a fake letter made, and he forges the signature of Aurelian. And on that letter, he puts a list of high-ranking military officers and Praetorian Guard members with a list to go like, purge them, or like a little kill list, This minor official hands the letter to the Praetorian Guards, shows them, and in a panic, they move up to Aurelian and they very quickly stab him to death. And then they immediately regret their decision. They're like, what did we just do? Can't undo this one. Now, even though they've regretted their decision immediately, but then they find out the letter is forged, so it's an absolute horror that they're like, what did we really do? So the nameless official is slowly and very painfully executed, but the damage to the empire is done. So now he was quite old, But at the age of 61, Aurelian, who has ruled for 5 unbelievable and effective years, is dead. And the Senate agree at this point to have him deified. So naturally, he's restored Rome. It was, at the point of a verge of a collapse. He pulled it somehow back together, conquered 2 empires, rejigged them, but didn't get the time he got to maybe even do a little bit
as
more.
we said earlier, at this point it feels like Rome has too many fundamental issues, including the Praetorian Guard, being corrupt and an issue. And there you go, like in previous eras where this would have been like the new golden age, you can just see he barely claws it together and then immediately then is killed and the cracks begin to show all over again.
Yeah. So we're going to wrap up fairly soon, but I'm just going to give a little bit of a conclusion about this episode and stuff that we'll cover after this. But in summary, we were meant to do an episode on Constantine, and we'll do one soon, but it was impossible to talk about Constantine without talking about Diocletian, who's attributed as like the end point of the crisis of the 3rd century. He's like, and the crisis is over with him. And then, Constantine takes over. But before Diocletian, you do have, there's a small stopgap of emperors, but then you have Aurelian. Now, if there's no Aurelian, there's no Diocletian, no Constantine, But if there's no Aurelian, you can really picture this empire fall apart immediately. As we said before, the empire is always going to fall apart. It is in the decline. But this is an example of a person who has this high level of ability that can somehow miraculously pull this whole thing back together. Now, the thing is, he dies. Whether or not he was assassinated there, but he was eventually going to die. So that you're only going to kick the can further down the road. You're not going to have an Aurelian live forever. So there's no way to just keep this guy here and making sure that the empire stays intact. That's never going to happen. And whoever he passes it on to, it's a hard act to follow. But we've mentioned at the start of the episode, but people often go on about the idea of like, the Roman Empire fell because of A, or the Roman Empire fell because of B. And ultimately, there is no empire you can point to that doesn't eventually decline. It mightn't fully collapse. It mightn't fall to pieces. It mightn't be, depends. But they always have like a build up, a ramp, an increase. They hit this zenith and then they have a decline. And it's inbuilt into it. And there's pretty much an inertia of empire that you can't stop it. You are always going to get corrupt officials. You're always going to get hedonistic elites. They're always going to exist. You're always going to get this generation that'll squander it. You're always going to get the upcoming generation that's going to try and save it. There's so many trends and forces and things to fight. Now, Aurelian is like this wonderful example of somebody who's able to stitch the thing back together in 5 years. 2 breakaway empires, pull them all back together. Well, actually, maybe I got to say Julius Caesar might be able to, but he's on the same level playing field as these kind of people. He has to be acknowledged as this unbelievable person. But the empire is going to decline and fall anyway, and you'll often hear, as I said, reasons for the decline, and like Edward Gibbon's Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. As I said, that's a colossal book that doesn't really answer. It does answer the question, but it doesn't give you a definitive answer. It's the question that people always ask. The very casual history people will ask, well, what caused the collapse or what caused the fall of the Roman Empire? What was it? Was it decadence? Was it obsession with gender? Was it, was it like, you'll get all of these great, was it climate change? Like, what caused the collapse? And you go, there are so many factors embedded into the whole thing. You can never truly pin it on a single thing. You could say, and this was the case I was trying to make at the very start of the episode, that the legions conquered the empire, but all of the problems that you can associate with the empire can almost entirely be placed on the idea that you have to pay the legions to keep the empire there. If they just wanted to stay in a section of Italy and do what they do, they can. That's not a problem. The problem is it's a vast territory that needs constant protection, and they don't have the infrastructure to do that. It's a serious problem. And even to address a few things, sometimes people go, it's the decadence and the obsession with gender and the whatever that possibly caused the collapse of the Roman Empire as well. To consider it, you go, who's probably one of the most decadent Roman emperors ever in terms of like the stuff that he's meant to have done is, I won't even say it here, it's pretty bad. in terms of the perversion and the obsession. And it is Tiberius who literally ruled at the start of the empire. So, you can't just go and then suddenly everybody, it's such a trope, everybody slid into decadence and that was it. These things do happen, but when one emperor slides into decadence, you get an Aurelian or somebody else who jumps up out of it. You're always going to have capable people who are able to do these kind of jobs. So every time it happens with other empires, and Cathal, you can probably agree with me on this one too, but I've had a few American listeners ask me the idea of like, oh, is America going to have the same kind of collapse as the Roman Empire? And I go, like, America should have split in two in their civil war and was pulled back together. These things can happen.
I mean, ultimately, yes, in that all things end, but it's not necessarily now, because there's always a chance to recuperate.
Yeah.
But
And people often look at history too often to try and learn exact lessons from it. And it seems the less people know of history, the more they use the only examples they know to explain it. Like, oh, that happened. That's exactly like the fall of Rome. It's like, no, it's not. It has some similarities, but you can learn.
Like one of my favorite all-time tweets of, guy who has only seen Boss Baby watching The Godfather. Wow, this film really has elements of Boss Baby in it.
That's a fantastic example. It really does have elements of Boss Baby. Yeah, it's like that. People who, I'm not trying to snipe people here for this. Like, if you have a limited knowledge of history, you always make a comparison to everything. And I go, like, there is the line that, history doesn't repeat itself, but sometimes it rhymes. And you do get the idea that, you can learn and cherry pick, but ultimately if you're trying to make a comparison between a modern day empire and a historical one, you go, there are so many things that are different, it's hard to pick the things that are the same. But at the same time, you can also look at that not necessarily as a template or as a frame, but something to go, they didn't do land reformation and this happened. So you can learn from it, but it's not an exact learning. So there's always value to history in that sense, but you can't always make the direct comparison of they were obsessed with A and then B happened.
You can say that, like, if an empire has become an omnishambles with a million different crises, it's going to be less resilient when an outside force comes in and raids it. That's kind of a given. But that's not a very valuable lesson because that is obvious.
Yeah, that's true too. But ultimately Rome was going to collapse. That has to happen. Like it now, an idea of it lives on in some way until the 1450s. So keep that in mind. There's a lot of imperial inertia that just lingers on for a very, very long time. And there are parts that do fall and break apart. But it's the very nature of empire that which lets you make an empire is the seeds of its eventual destruction. There's just no way to keep it going. It's literally nothing lasts forever. I think this episode kind of helps cover the idea of we're seeing the empire in collapse. We're seeing, we have seen the early episodes where there's the capable people pulling together with their effective form of government. We've seen, the golden ages of obviously the Scipio Africanus and then moving on into the Caesars. And it seems nothing can beat the Romans in Europe at that time. It's not a possibility. They're the favorite to win everything. And now we're finally seeing that other countries, other peoples, other tribes are learning from them, and their ability is going up and the Roman ability is steadily going down. And it's not like they don't see the problems themselves. They know their coins are less valuable. They know that legionnaires are getting overpaid. They know that they keep changing emperors every couple of years. They know that the precedent for a new emperor keeps changing and getting easier and easier and easier, because initially you had to be part of the Claudian Julian family, and then you had to be part of like an Italian noble senatorial class, and then it keeps going on further. Eventually then you just have to be an equestrian, and gradually it just works this way where anybody can be emperor. It's just a matter of if you've got enough support, that's all you need. It has a lot of problems. I think this is an interesting episode to cover that and to see that it's not just a vicious collapse. Things can be pulled up, but like there is a very clear it's not just a curve that goes up and down. Like this is a good example of it was dipping rapidly and then it had a bit of a dead cat bounce moment. It came up and then it's going to go back down again later. Yeah.
And equally you could argue if there was a longer sustained repeat of people of the standard of Aurelian, then maybe would have kept going, centuries longer again. And they did have a few good ones after him, but if that kept on going and going, who knows, maybe they would have recovered. But it's one maybe good leader after so many bad ones.
Another, and I won't harp around too much more about this, but another argument you sometimes hear is like, imagine if the Roman Empire never fell, the technology we'd have today. And people are aware with the phrase status quo. Do you know where that comes from? The clue is that it's Latin, but it's the idea of things staying exactly the same. There's a good argument you could make that if the Roman Empire was still in full command today, you'd still be using legionnaires because there's no reason to update. It's kind of like, why would we need to invest in gunpowder? Why would we need to invest in anything new or different? We have the imperial system, that's it. Because as much as people try and say that empire breeds innovation, sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't. Because sometimes it just gets, lax and
It took them centuries to figure out they should put a big wall around Rome.
That's true. And even the biggest innovation they had at the time was like cataphracts. And they go, that's not even from Rome. That's from other up-and-coming groups of people. I'll go, you never thought of wrapping armor around a horse? In fact, you don't have any horses at all. You've got pretty terrible cavalry. But so yeah, I know I'm harping on quite a little bit about it, but it's a fascinating subject. It's one that is so casually thrown around in pub conversation or a general history chat that it's one you could talk about for such a long time. The decline was certain. The fall is inevitable. There are other tribes and other groups that prop up, but like if you don't have a collapse of the Roman Empire, you can't have a rise centuries later of the Holy Roman Empire or any of the other various groups or kingdoms or tribes or like. So you'll have people lamenting the fall of Rome, but it's kind of like, do you kind of want to live in the world you live in today, or do you want to,
I mean, we're from and live in a country that happened as part of the collapse of another bigger empire, and I'm quite glad that happened.
That's very true.
The empire wasn't a good thing for the world.
Yeah, and it's not always good for everybody. That's definitely a take-home lesson. Like the era of Pax wasn't really peaceful for anybody outside of Italy.
And even then, it's kind of the imperial core. The frontier regions always have their skirmishes the whole time. So
yeah, very, very much so. So we'll wrap up this episode. We're going to come back and we'll take off from after Aurelian has died, and we'll look at what's going to happen next and how is the Roman Empire. It's been reestablished, but how are they going to try and keep that thing together? Spoiler alert: there's going to be a man who's going to grow some amazing cabbages.
As someone whose cabbages are eaten by insects over the last while, I'm excited to hear how it's done.
There should be a Diocletian cabbage. If there doesn't exist, there needs to be a Diocletian cabbage growing competition, and the imperial award goes to. But anyway, that's all coming down the road. But we'll get back to that again, and we'll look at the events after this, and then eventually go into Constantine, because we intended to cover him, but I think it was just really important to set the stage for what's going on. And you need, I think a reference point was needed, and Aurelian makes the excellent reference point for this one. So we're going to do a top 5 countdown. So Cathal, please, coming in at number 5 for this episode.
This episode I was expecting a huge list because this is spanning centuries. But for the countdown, I like to do the cutoff. Like all-time generals, I like to do a cutoff of minimum 5 battles, and then per episode, minimum 3. There are only like 13 generals, both for Rome and their opponents, even though this is spanning centuries, because it is such a revolving door, no one sticks around long enough to be in much. So it's kind of a surprising result in that way. But starting at number 5, and we only gave him a very brief mention as the winner of the Year of 4 Emperors, Vespasian. 3 battles, 3 wins, win over expectation of 12%. Average casualties dealt 25% above expectations. Casualties suffered 4% below. So, solid, not like an all-time great, but a very solid general.
Yeah, we didn't really go into him at all. I'll give a tiny little bit of an introduction, but the Year of the 4 Emperors is famous for obvious purposes. It's the Year of 4 Emperors. You start with Galba, who people thought he was going to be a good emperor until they elected him as emperor, and then they kind of went, wait a minute, he's crap.
Yeah.
It's only then that he's very quickly, and he's the one now of setting the new precedent of you don't have to be directly related to Julius Caesar. This is no longer a requirement. Otho then, as his treacherous usurper takes over. Vitellius is the guy who is, if you see any portraits or paintings of him, he's meant to be grotesquely overweight. But he's kind of so, in the ancient world, that didn't really exist. So the idea is it's meant to be, look how ridiculously opulent this guy is. But he's from a very kind of famous and very blue-blooded Roman family that kind of did a lot of work behind the scenes, and has a lot of had a very rich history. So Vitellius doesn't get much, but eventually it's as I said, Vespasian, he gets to take this position number 5 because he wins the first proper imperial civil war.
Yeah. And it really does set the scene as well, because you see when it's not a republic, it's not a monarchy of sorts, it does become the guy with the biggest army for the next several centuries, and you see he's the one who had the military experience, and he was the one who came out at the end of that year,
And the only guy who's a competent commander. Yeah, might makes right in this situation. So coming in then, please, at number 4.
Another one with a fleeting, not even mentioned directly. We mentioned his opponent, the incredibly average Marcus Aurelius, but Banadaspus was the person who Marcus Aurelius was fighting most of those times. So similar to him, it's 3 battles, 1 draw, 1 loss, and 1 win. But because the Roman army was that bit stronger, his stats are better because when he won it was a little less likely.
Sorry, I still can't get over the idea of Marcus Aurelius incredibly average, like one of the great minds of history.
The computer doesn't care about that.
No, it doesn't. Because you can stick your stoic philosophy where the sun don't shine. I'm all about military wins. And that's what you're lacking, Marcus. Your son is a disappointment.
But
I
think Bana, I suppose he's another good, not great general, win over expectation of 13%.
So yeah, this is kind of a good example. Well, actually, we were talking earlier about the Germans and the Germanic tribes incorporating better tactics and abilities. So it's a good, they've adopted new formations. They've got better gear. They're learning and they're getting better. And this is probably a good example if you go, the guy in charge is actually good. So that's good to know. But coming in 3rd place, number 3.
So surprisingly only 3, because his stats in other episodes would have put him right at the top, is Aurelian.
Really?
So Aurelian, 9 battles, 8 wins, and it's the fact that he had that 1 loss that probably kind of scuppers his score a little bit. Even though that he was expected to lose that one, it still damages the average.
He's invictus. He's unconquered. He's undefeated.
You leave that one out, it's a bit better. But wins over expectation is 31%. And honestly, I think that's probably the sweet spot strategically, because it means he's not taking stupid battles. He's not taking battles he was supposed to lose and turning them around. He's taking more sensible battles in the first place because he was usually expected to win them, but every time he was even slight favorite, he would win. And then the casualties dealt is one of the top 10 all time, 52% above expectation.
I think he doesn't like. Well, it's amazing that his clemency was taken. I will practice clemency. It's after what we've seen you do to the Goths.
Yeah, but yeah, it should be said out of all generals in the overall database, with 5 or more battles, he's 9th overall. So he's still incredibly high ranking in the all-time leaderboard.
I'm very impressed. I was honestly expecting that he was just going to rank here at number 1, and then we'd, I was going to save the little talk about him then. But because he's such a phenomenal individual in terms of how skilled, how much of a hill you have to climb to, within a 5-year span, pull back together 2 revolting, not revolting in the sense of awful, but 2 empires that have revolted and broken off. It's a much easier thing said than done, really.
Yeah.
So
I think it is he won all around him, but I think it's just that because he took battles when they suited him, that maybe he doesn't rank higher. You don't get any of those ones kind of winning against the odds. Because I don't think you could for 9 battles.
That's kind of, I got to say that. Yeah, I suppose you don't win the 8 out of 9 unless you actually do really well.
Yeah,
as in you got to actually be very skilled to that. You shouldn't be taking battles you lose. But that's always the best one. I know we've mentioned this a few times, where the history machine behaves like a 19th century historian. It's I love the over-the-top Alexander the Great, exactly. And he has to go and kill everyone. And if he didn't do it by himself, it was worthless.
I will say, the highest ranking in the all-time leaderboards for any Roman general is Julius Caesar at the moment, currently in the updated form.
Nice.
But keep in mind, he was writing his own dispatches, and he would always exaggerate how tough those odds were. So you kind of wonder where he would place if we had more accurate information. But because he always made it seem like it was some impossible task, History Machine loves him.
Yeah, that's right. Also, he talks about himself in the third person, and if another piece of advice to take from us, if there's anyone who talks in the third person, don't trust them, All right, so coming in then, please, at number 2.
Number 2 then is Trajan, who we did actually mention a good bit. And he
yes. Now, I did not touch him at all, really, but go on.
We gave him a bit of a mention just as like early days, and he, I suppose, did do the thing of taking more 50-50 battles. He had 4 battles, 4 wins over expectation of 54%. On average, he was usually in a roughly 50-50 or slightly under battle and won all of them. His casualties dealt are the real standout figure, though. That's 68% above expectation. It's one of the highest in the whole database, regardless of number of battles. So.
Yeah. Now, I was going to say, maybe we could come back and analyse him another time, just as a little side note for the other one. I know we've gone on quite a bit.
Yeah, we had to go through him quickly because we're covering centuries. But he, and also tying back in how we were talking about, the whole Dacian campaign and how it ended up just with that being let go. Most of Trajan's battles in the database, it was that initial conquest of Dacia.
That's true.
So a few centuries later, it's just gone.
Yeah, it's not worth. Well, not to go. I don't want to be. We're bad mouthing like Romania. It's not worth the land.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying you go to all that trouble and then you lose it anyway. But.
Yeah. Oh, that's true. Now, in fairness, sorry, as I said, they still mined the hell out of it before they left.
That's true.
Took what they wanted and did it. Yeah. Like, hey, it used to have a lot more metals here, and then we took them. But no, it's we could probably come back and do something small on him as even a side note or some small bonus or little extra thing. We kind of had to start this episode somewhere, and I didn't want to keep going through everybody. But so as I said, we blew past Trajan, but we could talk a little bit about him at a later point. I suppose he does have there's the Trajan's column still standing in Rome. Good example of just as I said, capable human being. Incredible emperor, one of the 5 good. So one of the 5 good for a reason. So I'm going to see who's coming in, Cathal, at number 1.
It's Shapur. 3 battles, 3 wins. Wins over expectation is 73%. Over casualties dealt, not as crazy as the others. It's still high. It's 28% above expectation, but nothing crazy. Now this one is one I would love to revisit if we expand the database down the road and start including. As far as medieval era and like knights are more a thing and heavy cavalry as a whole is more of a thing. I'd love to see because then History Machine will have figured out how to handle it a bit more, and the whole cataphract thing won't be as confusing to it.
Oh, that is fantastic. Sorry, I we might come back to the Sassanids.
I think he was maybe I think his odds of winning were maybe underrated. So he's kind of overrated as a result, because History Machine just didn't know what to do with cataphracts. There aren't many of them there yet because we're coming up to the end point of our database, which is only going to happen a couple of centuries after. So it's an interesting one.
Cathal, that is fantastic. I'm going to say an episode on late Rome, and the winner is Persia. Oh, that is sorry, that just came out of nowhere. That was a fantastic, Shapur. Sorry, I'm oh yes, of course. Oh, that is fantastic. The Sassanids are going to be a big threat, particularly for the Eastern Romans, for the longest time. So it's fun to see that Shapur the First is such a crazy threat. Because
in an episode about decline, it's symbolic that this is one of the outside forces accelerating it. Comes out on top.
That is fantastic. Yeah, I'm very impressed. That is kind of wonderful. I suppose the guy captured a Roman emperor alive and turned him into a footstool and then had him stuffed. You got to be
symbolism.
Yeah, not even Alexander could do that, and I'm sure he wanted to.
Oh, I'm sure he did.
So. That is fantastic. So that is all we're going to have for this episode. Thank you very, very much for listening to us. You can catch us on the socials, and you can find us at historymachinepodcast.com, or you can email us at historymachinepodcast@gmail.com. We will come back for the next episode, and we will take off from where we have left with the death of Aurelian and move on towards the next set of the barracks commanders and see where they go. So thank you so much for listening, and I have been Niall.
And I've been Cathal.
And we'll see you again soon.